from all over the world. So please drop in the chat where you're coming from. I am typing and trying to talk. I am coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin. Where are you all at? Here we go. Oh my gosh. We have a couple people from England, Switzerland, Denver. Hi, David. Chicago, my hometown, all over the Midwest. Love it. Taipei, love to see that. More people from the UK, Canada in the house. Oh my gosh, it's just so exciting to see. Oh my gosh, Finland. This is exciting just to see and imagine all of the globe lighting up with all of these people nerds tuned in today. We're so excited to have you all. We have a really packed agenda, so I'm going to just get started and introduce myself. My name is Julie Norvisis. I'm the VP of Research here at DScout. My pronouns are she, her. Like I said, I'm coming to you from my home office in Madison, Wisconsin. I will give a quick visual description of myself. I am a white middle-aged woman with long dark hair that's pulled back today. I'm wearing a denim shirt. My background is full of books and movie posters and guitars and concert posters and cats you'll probably see running around. Please, a couple of housekeeping things today. Please make sure, well, we encourage you, you could take this as a kind of a lean back and just absorb the content moment, but we really encourage you to lean forward and just be really active and lively in the chat. We saw that yesterday at CoLab Continued Day 1, and we want to see that continue. A reminder that all the sessions will be recorded. This is being recorded, and they will be made available on dscout.com after the session. Day 1 is already up there. I see some hi again, so welcome back if you were here on day 1. This is a long session. This is 3 hours, so take breaks as you need them. Do some jumping jacks, whatever's physically available to you. Go get some food, snacks, refresh your beverages. Now, for those of you who were here yesterday, this is a little bit repetitive, but for those of you who weren't, I want to make sure that you know who we are. I mentioned that I'm the VP of Research at DScout. DScout is a research software company. We think of ourselves as people nerds first and foremost, and we provide tools that help businesses stay human. We offer a variety of research options across the product development lifecycle to help you capture human insights from in-context moments with your customers, clients, members, users, humans. And this is a reminder that this is a replay of some of the content from CoLab, which was a conference, the first time we ever put this conference on. It took place in Chicago. We had about 80 research leaders join us in Chicago for an intimate gathering. We had UXR leaders, but also from adjacent fields, including some people who are with us today. You see some of our panelists here. We had people from product, strategy, design, market research, and even academia, and of course, research ops. The purpose of the CoLab in general was to just really address some of the challenges and opportunities that are facing our field today in a very real way, but in a very hopeful way. We talked a lot about provocations. We wanted to challenge our thinking. We talked about orthodoxies. We talked about that a lot yesterday, and flipping them, looking at strongly held beliefs that maybe still serve us, maybe no longer serve us, and having discussions about those. And our intention was to really, even though, the conference was kind of intimate, 80 people, like I said, our intention was always to expand the conversation, which is what makes this week so special for all of us, that we're welcoming so many more people into this conversation. Everybody left the conference, the CoLab conference, feeling energized, inspired, reconnected, and we want you all to feel that way too here today. Yesterday, like I said, we replayed my keynote. That is available on DScout today if you didn't have a chance to check that out. Tomorrow's sessions are going to be all about the UX of AI, one of the biggest hot topics going today. You're going to hear about, like, how does it work? You'll hear stories from the front lines, from people who are doing research on the UX of AI. You'll hear about the imperative for the role of UXR in shaping the future of AI. And you'll hear about how DScout is approaching it as well. On Thursday for Collab Continued is all about DScout's product. Our head of product, Jonathan Fearman, will talk about some of the exciting 2023 releases like usability and private panels. Some new exciting releases that we have, 2024 roadmap trends, and then kind of continuing to talk about how we deliver great participants for your research studies, which we're very, very proud to do. So today, we are going to replay some of the panel discussions that took place on our first full day of the Collab conference in October. Again, focused on provocations, shifting the thinking about the shape and the role of user experience research, and our obligations to maintain our ethical integrity, even as we create value for our organizations. If you hear references to beans in the replay, which you probably will, those are references to the great fireside chat that our CEO, Michael Winnick, had with the wonderful Eve Turopal, focused on her book, Hungry, in which she talks about how eating a more plant-forward diet, including beans, is one great way that we can personally impact climate change, so positively impact climate change. So if you hear references to beans, that's what that's all about. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joey, who's going to lead the panel in just a quick set of introductions so you put some, you know who you're dealing with in the chat here. Joey, take it away.
All right, thanks, Julie. As Julie mentioned, my name is Joey Jacob. My pronouns are she, her. I am the operations manager of user experience research over at Wattpad, which is a social storytelling platform connecting readers and writers to original works. Let me go through the list here. Okay, location. I am in Toronto, Canada. Brief description of me. Let's see, the visual background that I have is a gray brick wall. I'm wearing a black and white striped shirt. I'm white. I have black headphones. I'm always wearing lipstick. It's something that's the only thing that I will put effort in. I have short black hair. And what I wanted to share, I think, because like Julie mentioned, there'll be proper intros soon, but a win that I wanted to share is that I run and I created and run a program at Wattpad that is building empathy for our user-facing staff. And so this year we had 100% participation rate with our PMs in these chats, and they not only participated, but they really enjoyed it. And I know that that's a bit cheesy to say, but I have effectively figured out a way to make these things painless and fun. And sharing wins is, I think, what we should be doing a lot more of. So with that, I'm going to pass over for introduction over to Roy.
Thanks, Joey. Hey, folks. Excited to be here with you for Collab Continued. It's going to be a great day together. I'm so glad that so many of you are tuned in today. My name, like Joey said, is Roy. I am currently located in downtown Toronto, but I live about an hour away in a place called St. Catharines, about maybe 20 minutes from Niagara Falls. My pronouns are he, him, and I work at a company called Zapier. Zapier is an automation company, a software automation company. I've been there for a few years, right now leading the UX research team, but also used to lead the research operations team. So it's been a great few years there. No worries at all, Joey. But so physical description-wise, I'm a black male. I have short black hair, wearing actually it's like lots of black themes, wearing a black hoodie. And the background is, I don't know how to describe it, but it's colorful. I'm in a co-working space, so
Love it.
It's a colorful background that I don't quite know how to describe well. In terms of Collab, I am, like I said at the top, I was so excited to be part of this, and some of the conversations are still sort of ruminating in my brain. And my hope for you is that as we go through this today, that'll happen to you as well, like just activating some thoughts and some directions that haven't happened before. And so really looking forward to hopping into the chat with many of you today. All right, and I'm going to kick it to Greg.
Thank you, Roy. Hello, folks. My name is Greg Marinelli. Pronouns are he, him, and I am joining you from dreary Connecticut in the United States, where it's starting to get cold and we are preparing for snow. Let's see, I am a white man with short hair that tends to change color depending on my mood and how often I go to the salon. I am wearing a color blocked sweater, which Julie said I had to mention because of my penchant for sweaters. And I'm joining you from my home office, which is kind of like a dark purple office with like bright things like a yellow couch and stuff like that. I work for JP Morgan Chase. I lead UX research for the consumer bank at JP Morgan Chase and have been there for about 6.5 years. All that means is basically checking and savings accounts. Think of that. That's the easy way to think about it. And you'll hear my full intro in the recording as well. And with that, let me turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Lisa Gooding. I'm an executive vice president at the large market research company called Ipsos. And I'm personally based here in Minneapolis. I'm a week or so ahead of Greg, it sounds like, with nice fluffy white snow falling as I look out my window, which is beautiful, but just the start of what will surely be a typical long Minneapolis winter. In terms of my visuals, I'm a white woman with long dark hair. I have my background blurred right now, so you don't have to see my whiteboard behind me. And in terms of what's really interesting me at the moment, I think with so many people in 2023 finding themselves in situations that they didn't expect, looking for jobs or shifting positions, or companies that are facing new technologies and new ways of doing business, just continuous learning is so important. And I think it's one of the great things that we're getting from these collab experiences. So I'm thankful for that. And with that in mind, I will pass it to Todd.
Hey gang, Todd McCulley here. I'm excited to be here. I'm kind of an outsider in that while I'm not a UXR person or a design person, I'm a business person, professor at Vanderbilt, and a massive fan of UXR and design. Changed my career in the late 90s when I discovered it, and have really tried to integrate UXR design and business strategy for the last 25 years. Excited to be here, loved the conference. I'm the guy, the nutty professor wearing the red sweater with the global map behind me, and couldn't be more excited to be with you all.
And I think
I don't know who to hand it to.
I think that leaves Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Hey everyone, I'm Jonathan DeFavery. My pronouns are he, him. I lead design research at Headspace, which is a mindfulness and mental health app. Dialing in from Los Angeles, California today. No snow, but I miss and I'm actually jealous of your experiences with that. I'm a white man with short salt and pepper hair and glasses, wearing a black fuzzy sweatshirt. And in my home office with a kind of greenish teal background as well. I really loved the spirit of provocations that collab brought. I'm shy about tension and conflict sometimes, but this was such a healthy version. So I'm really excited to bring that forward into the chat today with you all. So with that, I'll pass it back off to Julie.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for those intros. These wonderful folks are here to engage with you in the chat. Not all of our panelists could be with us today, so you'll meet some more people as we get the replays going. And what you're about to see are edited versions of the panel discussions. And then what we did was break out into small groups and came back together. So you'll see edited versions of those share out conversations as well with the larger group. We're going to start with the first set of paired panels, which we called flexibility, levers of flexibility and anatomy of a team. These were talking about the practice of UXR and engaging in flexibility in that, and then the structure of UXR. So please, we're going to do that video. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to come back to the second video, which you'll definitely want to stick around for. It's about the tension between ROI and value of our work and ethics and integrity of our work. So please stick around for that. All right, and with that, please again engage in the chat, provoke, challenge each other, debate, and I will hand it over to our wonderful marketing specialist, Katie, who's going to click on that video and press play. So we'll see you in about 80 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Really excited to introduce, first I'm going to introduce the concept of how the panels are going to work today. We have 2 panels in the morning and 2 panels in the afternoon, and they're deliberately paired thematically to create some tensions and to create some, like a pairing. This one I think is complementary pairings, which we'll go into. This afternoons are going to be a little bit more kind of a difficult pairing, maybe like a fusion, an unexpected pairing. But we're going to talk for about a half an hour between the panels, and then we're going to talk among the panels. And then we're going to break out, and you should all break out, find a table. Please sit with people you don't know, that you haven't been sitting with. Try to kind of mix it up, work with some new people. And the panelists are going to kind of split our time among the tables. So you'll have a chance to talk with the panelists then. And then we'll all come back together and we'll share kind of some of the key takeaways from the table conversations and have a conversation about that as well. We have been working hard to prepare for these panels around the concept of provocations. And so people are going to be sharing thoughts that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, that you may disagree with, that you may have a really strong opinion on differently. Good. That's good. We shouldn't all agree here. Nobody here is the smartest person in the room. You are absolved of having to feel that way today. You can just be openly sharing your ideas, sharing them with others, and playing with them. So prepare to be provoked in a friendly way by our panelists. I'm going to first introduce our flexibility, Levers of Flexibility panel. Levers of Flexibility is about our practice. It's about how do we, if we're a kite, I guess, what adjustments do we need to make to the prevailing conditions? What's the right structure for us to be in? Things like that. So we'll talk about like the internal practice of user research. And before I introduce them individually, I will share that this panel is deeply divided on the topic of pineapple on pizza. So Greg is a no, Marissa's a yes. Joey, you said you need more data.
I do.
So
It's delicious, just maybe not with bread.
pineapple is good, not on pizza. I'm with you, but you know, that's something you can follow up with them on later. But please let me introduce first Marissa. Marissa came to us from San Francisco. She holds a degree from Stanford in computer science. She has about 20 years in UX and product design, from Adobe to LinkedIn to Apartment List, Shipped, and now she is the CXO of Acorns, where she leads a team that includes research and insights, but also product design, customer support, product development, and is responsible for the product development of core apps at Acorns. So welcome, Marissa. And then we have Joey joining us from Toronto. Joey holds a master's in sociology from the University of Manitoba and a PhD in philosophy from Ryerson University. She sprung from her career in academia to pivot to UX and ultimately to UXR Ops, which is where she is today as the UXR Ops lead at Wattpad in Toronto, a really cool company. And she brings a real focus on organizational behavior and business with consumer desires. So thank you for joining us, Joey from Toronto. And finally, we have Greg from the wonderful town of Athens, GA, which produces some great music, we have to say. Greg holds an MFA in graphic design, UX, and business from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And has had a UXR career in roles in media from Condé Nast and Vox, and now is head of UXR at Hearst. And he is also the author of a really incredible book called Research Practices, which if you haven't read it, Right, Roy's nodding. Yeah, we know this book. It's a great book, gathering a lot of perspectives of people in the field. So check out Greg's book. And welcome, Greg. Thank you all so much for traveling from far and wide to be here today. And let's talk about flexibility. Greg, I'm going to start with you. With your background in media, news, media, journalism, Cosmo, all of those things. And your book, which you talk to so many people and you talk about researching researchers, you're an expert on us. How has that informed your perspective on flexibility of practice?
I would just like to say that I was told to prepare nothing but notes on beans after last night's dinner. I have no good material.
No further content. Well, let's talk about beans. I think everybody's into that.
Yeah, first of all, thank you all for coming and thank you for having me. I was a designer for a number of years before I became a professor, and then I became a UX researcher, and I thought that that was unique, and I was a snowflake. And then when I set out to write my book on what it means to be a UX researcher, I realized we all have taken weird paths that require flexibility to go into what we're doing. I love our tribe of research people, but none of us have the same jobs. Marissa is in financial services, and my most recent project was on how to make Mark Wahlberg's workouts easier to find on menshealth.com. Like, same jobs, very different practices of those jobs. So I think
Were you successful in making them easier to find?
I'll let you know once we go. No, we weren't successful. You couldn't find it.
I couldn't find them.
Even if we have the same jobs, the researchers at Shopify and the researchers at Amazon, totally different. The researchers at DuckDuckGo and the researchers at Google Search, very different. So I think that shows that flexibility is a requirement of our jobs. Even if we think we have the exact same roles and responsibilities, who we work with, what our managers expect, the company culture, all of that is going to inform how we have to apply our jobs as researchers. So I think we have to be flexible. And that also means that we'll have career longevity. We have to be shapeshifters and adapt ourselves and our practices to what our organizations need at any given time, whether we're at a startup that's trying to find product market fit, or in my case, a century-old media company that is just trying not to rock the boat and is trying to remain profitable for as long as people buy magazines. So
Yeah.
I know that was a wide-ranging answer, but
No, it's great. Like, I think you're absolutely right. It is a requirement of researchers and research leaders to be flexible, but how do you prepare for that? Like, that's great to be responsive to changing conditions and to changing orgs, but like, that's a lot. What's your advice for like moving into that flexibility in a productive way?
I am trying to think of a concise answer for this, but at the end of the day, our job is to help our business partners make better decisions. They don't care how we do that. They don't care what our best practices are. They just want us to help them. And if we don't help them, they're still going to make decisions whether we're along for the ride or not. So I think if we have that mindset that we have to be flexible in order to provide value, I think that's the right way to make sure that people will depend on us so that we are providing the right information at the right time.
Yeah. Marissa, that's actually a good segue, and we all have mics, so like chime in whenever, but dangerous.
Now's a good time for beans again.
Do you want to talk about beans some more, Joey?
I could talk about beans forever.
We should definitely have maybe we'll stay late and have a separate panel on beans.
Forget about this pineapple and pizza question. What is your favorite bean?
I know. Oh my gosh.
I like mine refried with real lard.
Oh. We can't even go there, Marissa. My head is exploding. Okay. All right, Marissa, from your perspective, I know you have a ton of respect for researchers. We've worked together. I know that. But you come from a really different perspective, so kind of let us have it a little bit. Like, Greg is talking about his view on the importance of flexibility, but I think you've seen a lot of research leaders in your career, and like, what do you think, how has your perspective on flexibility changed over the years?
Yeah, and by the way, Julie is amazing. So thank you very much for inviting us. It was awesome to work with.
Thank you.
Someday I hope we work together again. So when I started out as a designer, and I was this IC designer. I worked with researchers, I worked with PMs, and research was like, I just thought it was like this function in the bowels of product development that helped ICs like me make these small decisions about our product, not like game-changing decisions. But as I grew as a leader and started taking on more and more of a company leadership role, and then seeing people like Julie and other research leaders embrace working with those leaders at a company level, I realized how important it is for research to have that seat at the table, for research to influence the big strategic questions, which market insights was already kind of doing, maybe CX insights at certain companies, and having that like mindset that, okay, how do I, like what Greg said, how do I influence that company leader making this decision that's going to make or break the business, not just working with an individual designer on what this particular user flow is like.
Yeah. And what would you say are like a few things UXR could do to get out of our own way?
Yeah, I got 3. So the first one is, I believe we have to get rid of this dogmatic belief that no data is better than bad data. Second, I think that we have to stop gatekeeping research and saying researchers are the only people who can do research, or worse, you're not even allowed to talk to a customer if you're not a researcher. And third, it is that we have to represent the whole of our user or our customer, and not just report out individual research studies, this one particular methodology that we did and the insights that came from it, because those things are always going to be questioned.
I just want to chime in that one of the principles I have for my team is some data is better than no data. It's better than making decisions in a vacuum with no information whatsoever. So even if it's outdated or it's a small sample size, it's still better than nothing, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's interesting. I'm like nodding and agreeing, and of course I believe you logically, but there's also a part of me that's like, no, the data has to be perfect.
I know.
Can't
I
help
know.
it.
But here-
Isn't, sorry, I was going to say that isn't the value of bad data is still having people who are trained to know how to look at it and
Right.
then make the best possible, not just suggestions, but directives for business leaders. Like that is also where
Yeah.
research comes in. So bad data is great because you know what to say about it.
Exactly. And I say bad because we're supposed to be provocative. It's more likely imperfect, right? All research that you do is done within a context. And what I have found is when you present this research finding or whatever, and you say, oh, here's the caveat, right? People start questioning, well, that's a lab setting. Well, you targeted these. Well, the only people who fill out surveys are the ones who love you or the ones that hate you, right? And that makes it so that your data is being ignored, right? So if instead you can come in with, hey, like this is what we did, here's the context of it, it's still probably closer to right than not knowing anything at all. So as a leader, as a business leader, if I go and I act on certain data and I understand that context, then I can course correct if I'm finding that it's not quite playing out the way that I thought, and I'm probably closer to being right than if I am like, well, let me just make a decision on my own, and I don't really know, I'm going to guess, and then I have no idea which way to turn to figure out my next step.
Well, definitely nobody wants executives making ideas just up, having ideas just out of their own heads.
Some of us have some good intuition. I don't know.
All right, Joey. From your perspective, in ops right now, what are you thinking of all of this? How do you think ops plays a role in supporting flexibility and unlocking that potential in all these complexities?
So I will begin by saying that I think that if you're not using ops or using it effectively, that is where UXR will continue to stagnate. Provocation.
Yeah, I agree.
If you don't have ops, let's talk, because you need to, I can tell you what to do to get that set up. But the main blocker or challenge, is that where we should go?
Yeah, do it.
Okay. So the tricky part is ops. It's very easy to get stuck in what I've been calling triage loops. So if you have worked with ops, you've seen it happen before, where everything that is strategic and meant to drive research to various teams and across an entire company just gets stuck because something horrible happens and it has to be solved immediately. And especially like Julie, the great, the keynote that you began with, the presentation is, you planted the perfect seed for what my argument is here, because it ends up, it's very easy to get stuck in these triage loops because we're up against major changes in the industry, economic layoffs, research not feeling respected. And so not leveraging ops will reinforce that. So if you get stuck in triage loops, it means, you know, it's a complete failure to pass on information that is relevant to various business units, to make these timely decisions. And instead, the other piece of it too is that you're not scaling. And so beautiful research will happen and new methods are being developed and it's not being cataloged and communicated and shared. And so all the researchers also fail to learn from each other. And I've seen this in a variety of companies in the last year. And this reinforces all of what we're talking about this morning, and that the feeling of being on the outside and having to scream, no, we're really important. And so really, really ensuring that you make room for scaling practices, especially from an ops perspective, is imperative for moving forward.
Yeah, I've personally seen the power of ops to just completely transform the way a team is perceived and behaving in an organization. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I come from a bit of a unique background between the PhD and now, so working in partnerships in business development in startups. And so I bring all of that lens, and that's exactly it. So I see what's happening and people not communicating across teams and across departments. And it's heartbreaking because
Yeah, it is.
It's not, you know, like it's really easy to paint a simple solution, but building it into a practice is actually doable.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. All right, I'm going to turn to our second panel here. Thank you. We'll do a little bit of crosstalk in a minute. Obviously, so much we could be talking about, mostly beans. All right, welcome. So our second panel is called Anatomy of a Team. And this one is really about, if this was about practice and flexibility, this is about the structure. What are the bones? So, you know, if we think about the physical body, if we're getting flexible and practicing yoga, you know, what is the body? What is the correct body that we have? Or not correct, but the healthy body. Carl and Roy, I'm sorry, are also divided. But I think they're going to be divided with most of you as well on a really important topic, that is coffee is life. Roy says no, which I think is confusing.
Just burns the gut. So.
And Carl needs more information on this, which is also confusing. But I disagree vehemently with both of you. But when we're finished talking about beans, well, coffee's a bean. We'll just add it into the conversation. All right, let me introduce Roy. Roy is coming to us from Ontario, where he dwells, but he hails from Kenya. He holds a master's in commerce, organization, and management from the University of North South Wales in Sydney, Australia. He's been in UXR and service design for a decade and is currently the head of research operations at Zapier. He is also the lead of a wonderful newsletter and podcast called Scaling Research, which if you don't tune into, you absolutely should. So welcome, Roy. Roy is also a People Nerds contributor, so thank you for that. I think I failed to mention, Greg is also a People Nerds contributor. Yeah, great stuff. And let me move on to Carl, who is also coming to us from Canada, from Toronto. So it's like a
I feel a little overwhelmed.
Canada thing, non-intentional, but welcome. Carl completed PhD studies in cognitive science and clinical psychology at the University of Toronto. And a really interesting path, which you should ask him about, ended up at IBM, where he has been now for 35 years. In various capacities in leadership of design and research, and currently is the Global VP of User Experience Research at IBM. He's also an industry professor at DeGroote, heading up a class on exec MBA in digital transformation. and enterprise design thinking, which is all very cool. So thank you, Roy and Carl, for being here today. And let's just launch right into it. Roy, when you think about team structures and the kind of so-called anatomy of a team, it changes, doesn't it? Tell me kind of what's going on with you at Zapier right now. Tell us kind of how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like many folks, our team went through layoffs, and it's one of those things you see happening in other teams, and you hope never happens to you. But you know, sometimes, unfortunately, that moment happens, and I think the team can be in a place. It's very easy to get into sort of the "woe is me" space. You know, we're not valued enough. How do we position ourselves better? But I think that moment where things change, when you become more constrained, is the moment for me as a leader to take advantage of in sort of a strange way. So I think being in this dynamic where we're all feeling that shift, or you know, I guess the perception. I think the charts are helpful here, where it's not just UXR. There's something happening across our practices, but enabling our team to be in a place where, with the constraints we have, whether it's like a smaller team or fewer resources, creates a moment for us to actually be more creative, right? Like, how can we think about this differently? And it's actually a moment where I think there's more openness to change from leadership about who we are as a team, the way in which we can be effective, the way we should be structured.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is true. The opportunities in the change, whether you're in hyper growth, which I think we've all experienced too, or kind of a more of a constrained environment, you still have to think of it in that way, right?
Yeah, because I think what the path you can go down is sort of being trying to be protectivist in a way, like trying to encircle the team. And I think you should take care of the team, right? Like, that's a really important piece of being a leader, is making sure they feel safe, making sure they have clarity about what's going on, but also just acknowledging where there is a moment in time to do something different. The environment has shifted such that there is an opportunity to do something different, and it's going to be much easier.
Yeah.
So those are the moments to not just, you know, get in a huddle, but actually think expansively. Like, this is a time to change something, where in maybe previous times it would be a lot harder to push with leadership.
You know what I've learned over the years? Change is hard.
It is.
And people struggle with that. So what you're talking about is a lot of change. So can you share any kind of tips or things that you've learned or relearned about how to like manage big shifts in orgs and big changes that can occur? Because it requires people to change their thinking a lot and their practices. Sometimes everything's up in the air.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of time providing clarity about providing a vision and clarity about what success means, right? So, you know, for us as a team, one of the things that have changed for us is our mandate is to accelerate learning in the org, right? And that's not something we talked about a lot before.
So that's your kind of team vision, accelerate learning.
That's what we're focused on, right?
That's very clear, yeah.
And for the team to be able to, in a moment of maybe elevated anxiety, obviously sadness, we've lost some folks that were really dear to us, and what does this mean for us, to be able to provide a clear pathway about how we're going to make a shift in terms of where we're positioned and the mandate that we're going to execute. So I think there's some level of, when there's change afoot and when that instability is there, there's an onus on us as leadership to provide more clarity, to provide more direction, and to be more forceful in that moment, so that there's at least that level of stability in terms of where we're going as a team.
And maybe that's something we can talk about in breakout groups too, is like, how do you find that within yourself, right? Like, you say that, and like, it's a very easy thing. Create clarity for a team. Like, I've been in that position where I'm like, create clarity. Like, where is that coming from? You know, but you know, you work together, you find it, you clarify your own thinking and stuff like that. So I think it's an interesting thing for us all to kind of think about. Yeah. Carl, what do you think? We've talked a lot about, I know you have some really cool thoughts on clarity too, and things you're doing on your team as well.
Yeah, it's worth saying that the 35 years that I've been IBM, I was attempted to be headhunted away from IBM about a year and a half ago. And I decided that my job was not done at the company in terms of really transforming it. And I told my boss at the time, I'm going to stay, but I'm going to call bullshit on anything that is not done correctly. And at my stage of career, I'd like to be able to do that now, and I do that a lot. So I really decided, I saw the same kind of signals. There was a lot of layoffs going on, so I decided that I would do two things. I would be defensive, so I took out ops as a term out of any part of my organization. Still do the work of research ops. I just don't call it that because it's, you know, you got a target on you if you have that kind of term in my company. Also tried to be offensive. So I basically took an entrepreneurial approach to this thing. I basically put a pitch deck together and took it to a vice president, senior vice president that didn't really get the importance of research. Also thought that it was just basically usability testing, and that, well, what are we doing that's any different from product management? Don't
Does
you
this
just
sound
talk to
familiar,
people?
any of this?
Right? And so I just worked really hard. I did a listening tour of all of our researchers. I got about 300 of them around the globe. What they were feeling, the kind of questions that you've been asking here too, so to have some basis in where I wanted to go. So I put the pitch deck together. I saw it very much like a startup trying to get funding. That's what it is. I get the funding directly from this senior vice president. So I got the funding. It was a huge success, actually, with this particular guy. So we got more investment in research than any of the other functions of the company as well. So we've been hired 34 people this year, for example. But it was really also a focus on sort of being bold, you know, calling bullshit type things. So we said, okay, look, they used to always be part of the design function. And we said, no, UX research is a separate discipline. If you see anything I'm writing, you know, and sharing on LinkedIn, I'm leaning in really heavily with saying, no, it's not the case that we want to hire designers that have an interest in research. I'm doing in my hiring right now, I'm pushing back really hard on that, saying, no, UX research is a separate thing. The designers need to know how to do some research, the democratization question. Yeah, we got to do that in an organized fashion. We got a training program going on right now for product managers or any other adjacent discipline. They should know the philosophy of and some core methods of research, but they're not researchers. Just like if you teach somebody to do design thinking, I had one head of a business school that said after we went through a session on design thinking, said, well, now we don't need designers anymore, do we? I said, hell yeah. Just like if you know the basic sort of tenets of UX research, if the whole team has that, you're going to be more successful, but you still need to have that deep skill here as well. So I think there was a real focus on that. And the third theme is laying on really heavy on impact. And looking at, for example, senior vice presidents and CEOs love to look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, in the quadrant charts, right? I figure, okay, that's the way that I'm actually going to illustrate the impact that we're having. So we basically collect data on how much research we do. If you do a lot of research and you're having direct impact on the products you're building, then you're in the Magic Quadrant. And if you want to play to the way that senior executives think, that's a way to get them really fired up, because if they're not in that Magic Quadrant, they're going to be motivated to go down that direction as well. So I just think it's really all about seeing your part of the organization and being crystal clear to the decision makers on a regular basis. As you know, you don't just do it once a year. You do it on a regular basis, coming up, and at least that's what I do now in my organization, is really making sure that we're regularly showing the impact that we're having, taking every bit of insight that we get from a user and then wiring it in. We have some tooling that does that, wiring it directly into the roadmaps that product managers are generating. And then we can actually track what level of impact we're actually having through the cycle as well.
Yeah. Joey, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to jump in. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly it. One of the things that I've been trying to push for is when you finish a research project, don't just jump onto something else. We actually have to make sure we're tracking it and sharing it widely, and not just to the PM who we're working with, but to actually move it up towards the business unit, and then all the way up to president. Like these kinds of pieces of information get lost, and we quickly move on to the next research project and just lose track of it, and it devalues everything we're doing.
Yeah.
One other one I want to add about the there's this notion that some 20, 25 years ago, I used to run workshops at design conferences, and at show of hands, who's the only designer in your company? And like 80% of everybody would say that, right? There's been an ascendancy of design now over all of that time. Design is in much better shape. UX research has been there all these years, but now is in this ascendancy, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've been doing is also saying we want to staff optimally. That means that you don't just need one researcher on a project. You might need, in one case, I got 23 researchers on one project, because that's what that project needs, right? So we basically took researchers off of a lot of other projects that weren't as high priority, just to put them on the really important ones. And then there's the product managers and executives are responsible for the ones that I took the staff from are like screaming.
Yeah.
Said, yeah, okay,
Isn't that the
so give
greatest?
me more headcount to be able to staff your projects as well. But to optimize for success, you have to have the right level of staffing, as well, and not be doing the nice, kind thing to, oh yeah, okay, we'll cover your project part-time. No, that's a mistake. I think we need to be really careful saying, this is the kind of staffing we need, that's the kind of budget we need for that, and make sure then you have impact once you've actually got the staff as well.
Yeah.
Can I go back to one thing?
Yeah, please.
This is my provocation. Impact, I believe, is a trap. And here's why. Our work is so diffuse. How many people here have had your research findings maybe shelved and unused?
That's never happened to me.
Never happened. Maybe your product manager or your design director makes a decision that doesn't align with what you recommended in your research. What if your product marketing team does a really shitty job and nobody uses the product that you just researched? So impact, I understand the intention and I understand it's how we can prove our value, but proving our value is also a trap because there's so many variables that go into our work that it makes it impossible to make a one-to-one connection. So that is my provocation.
Oh, that's a good one. And that's a good segue, because we're going to wrap up our panel. And does anybody else have any last provocations that they want to just lob out there?
I'll throw out one
Okay.
that kind of relates to impact as well, and something that I've seen and that what I position my researchers to do, even though they're researchers and not necessarily like insights analysts. Every single time a research study is presented on my team, I ask the researchers to go and talk to customer support, talk to the people who run NPS, talk to, or go and look at the app reviews, app ratings, go and talk to the data analysts. And in your presentation, make sure to include things that relate from those groups with the research that you just did. If they match, great, your research will be listened to more because executives pay attention to things like data, hard data analytics, I mean. If they don't, now you're going to get into real talk because why doesn't the data agree and how do you make sense of that? So that's my challenge to all researchers.
Triangulation, my favorite.
I have one which didn't talk too much about, but it's about where UXR reports into. And we talked about UXR reporting into design, into product. I'll report into ops as well. I don't actually think it matters. I think that what matters is the person that you're reporting into. Because I've had people in design who have been great and horrible. I've had people in product who have been great and horrible. I've had people in ops who have been great and horrible. The thing that matters the most is that person and how much they're going to advocate for you and your practice. So I think the conversation about design and product doesn't actually matter.
It's a red herring, yeah. All right.
I'll add one really quick
Okay.
one. That I think that we need to make sure that when we're focusing on discipline, that the UX research discipline needs to upskill significantly.
Yeah.
People talk about being a qual or a quant. You got to be both. You got to be phenomenal, right? And so you've got to democratize UX research across. But that also sets the expectation for researchers to actually be significantly skilled up as well.
Yeah.
And I also think, so I agree with also grabbing data from all the other touch points that you have in the company. I think a lot of those should be automated. That's what I'm working on significantly, instrumenting, all of the products that we have so that so that's the continuous collection of information about what feedback we're getting. So researchers don't have to do all the heavy lifting, but then to be able to have the insights to say, oh, here's where we need to do an episodic study to really sort of dig in deeper as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Joe, you want to bring us home?
I'll bring up AI for a quick second and just figure out, I think the provocation is what can we do? How can we actually oh my God, everybody's always thinking this anyway, but like maximizing how we use AI so it doesn't replace us. And so that's bringing back the human part. So how do we actually properly communicate with each other with the tools that AI provides us?
Yeah. 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 Wonderful. All right, well, we're gathered our amazing panel back up here to share some of their reflections based on the conversations that they have had with all of you, but also this should be interactive. So you might get called on to share a perspective that you had, or you might want to elaborate on something or share something with the larger group. So please, going back to what I said earlier, nobody here is the smartest person in the room. We're all pretty smart up here. But you are also very smart, so please participate in this conversation. But Carl, you want to kick us off with some of the highlights from the tables?
I would love to. And I think, these are the best conversations ever. People that were in the two groups that I just talked to. And the first one, and I want to celebrate and thank the team for challenging me right when I sat down, saying it's fine to say all these things in a 280,000 person company that has all these, and all the kind of things that I was saying. I really appreciated saying, oh, but I've only got 10 researchers in my organization, so all this lofty things that I was talking about, how would it apply? And then we went into a discussion that was, I think, very effective of saying, well, could you use the principles of prioritization? Could you think of, whatever? And that went really well, I think. And then we also talked about this notion, like we don't have extra staff to go, put a research repository together, for example. And then we had this discussion on different people around the table having experience with very simple, ways of capturing data. We talked about Airtable. Half the table, I think, really loved Airtable, and then there was a challenge back saying, yeah, but it's fine when you see the results of after you've done all the setting up of the Airtable and the like. But I think that was a pretty good insight as well. And then a lot of talk starting with the team over here about impact, how we can actually be tracking impact. And then when I had the conversation with the team over here, we got deeply into impact. What measures should we actually be using for impact? We talked about that if you've got SUS scores, but the senior executive team doesn't know what that is. What kind of measures can you actually look at? And can we even look at the correlation between the measures that we use that are deeper in terms of understanding the user and how they relate to things like retention and how important that is? So the measures that the company cares about as well. Talked a lot also about the relationship between the various insight functions, sort of market research and reporting. One organization reporting into market research, how does that impact the way that you do the UX research work? Another organization ripped themselves out of design and now report into strategy, and that's also an interesting sort of year of struggle. Apparently, really sort of difficult relationships between working with design and the like. And then also, and one of the other team members is just in the process now of actually figuring out what the relationship should be between research and like market research and UX research. In my case, at IBM, we actually nothing to do with me, but basically got rid of the market research function, and they've got 7 left apparently, and responsibility was given to me to fill in the gaps. But I was reminded that in the book inspired by Marty Kagan, a really good book that you should all read in terms of how it's instruction for product managers basically, and he doesn't quite get, he does as a real person, he's like very well known in the product management area. But if you read my blog post about his book, you'll see that he has, since writing the book, talked a lot about the importance of UX research and the like, but it doesn't come through that book. But there's a good quote in there saying that nobody used market research to invent a successful product. It really takes UX research and its insights directly working with people, getting those unmet needs and the like to be able to come up with an idea for a new product. But you still need to have market research information, like as well. But there was a lot of talk about that there's that different functions are doing the same thing. and are not necessarily sharing it with one another. So I think that's one of the other challenges of our field, is to align and ideally maybe be part of one organization. But I think, as you had said before, Roy, too, it doesn't matter who you're part of. My sort of insight always is that it's the people. That if you're really, like in my case, I still report to design because I'm reporting to a person that's been the best manager I've had in 35 years. So I'm not changing. If she ended up being head of product, fine, I'd report to her as well. But so I think there really is something about the people that you're working with and aligning with people that you really can understand deeply. But I think the themes were, I think, directly foundational to the kind of issues that we're dealing with here. And I think the last team I was with, I was asking sort of, what are you going to take back, from the discussion? And so a lot of the talk about this notion of prioritization being key, this alignment of the organization, trying to make metrics, like I said earlier, something that can be understood, not just by us and together with product management and design, but even up to the SVP and CEO level as well, was really key.
Yeah. There's so many threads to pull on there. I'm curious if anybody has, in the kind of do and dream category, like anything that came up either from the panelists or anybody on insight integration, on working with other insight groups across the organization that can maybe help unlock things for some people who are in the earlier stages of that. Anything come up?
Sort of.
Good.
My table, which was excellent. We talked a little bit about repositories and using those as a way to share or
bridge
not
some
share
of those
insights.
gaps.
Yeah. And we were pretty divided. Some folks have had success with them, but also some folks have shied away because you can still misconstrue the data that's within a repository. So it goes back to who is the person who should be sharing the work and providing the necessary context around it. But we didn't really have a clear answer on the value or how to set up a repository effectively.
Yeah. Well, the repositories are definitely one of the more difficult conversations that we tend to have. Yeah, Steph. Nope.
There you go.
Okay, I'm getting in here. We'd had a debate about repositories as well, and I'm really curious to talk tomorrow a little bit about how AI plays into making these repositories actually useful, because they often are not. In terms of working across disciplines, another thing I brought up from my experience is that we often talk about having empathy for the users, but we don't always look for developing empathy for the other disciplines within our organization. I had to learn all about engineering, which I never knew about, in order to collaborate better with engineers. And I had to develop that empathy and do research on them to understand how to reach out to them.
Yeah, that's great.
On that note, we in the group that I was in, we were talking a lot about the concept of role and relationships, and a really incisive point came out, which was that researchers are the therapists of a company. And I want to say that the flip side is also what we talked about, is maybe being like one of the themes was what's the role, but are we a little too self-important? Because if we're thinking of ourselves as therapists, if we're thinking of ourselves as constantly being undermined and nobody listens, well, is that true, first of all, but is it also, are we building that into how we were relating? And then, to that point about being therapists, though, the tension came up about a conversation, or being therapists, but in partnership, right? And so the concept came up of, say just for instance, you're having a conversation with a PM, and that thing comes up, and I think a lot of us have had that experience of I told you that thing, and the tension between having to moderate how you use your words and feeling the phrase that came up was babysitter tone. Did I get that right? I can't see where you are. But so the babysitter tone and having to not do that. And so I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here, but thematically about role and relationships. And so, it is provocation. Do we feel like we need to use babysitter tone all the time?
I'm looking at Sally. Actually, we used to joke at LinkedIn that we were the Department of Broken Records. And we could, we didn't share that with our partners, but it revealed a lot about, I think, how we felt about that. Like, we feel like we've told you this, but let's just go over it again. And that doesn't put us in a great position, right? Like, nobody wants to be babysat. Like, what does that say? I think it's a great provocation, actually, of like, what does that say about how we see our place in this relationship, right? In the discourse that we're having with people. It's not very healthy. So that's a good, like, orthodoxy for us maybe to think about, is like, what if we weren't the Department of Broken Records, right? What if we didn't feel that way? What if we didn't feel like we had to be babysittery? What's holding us back from that? Can we get a mic over?
I feel like I've been on a lifelong quest to not use PowerPoint. I apologize if there's anyone from Microsoft here. Nothing against it as a software, but as a way to communicate the results of our research, I'm just always looking for the most immersive way to do that as possible. Because I think, and this is not to say that this is the cure-all for not becoming the Department of Broken Records, but I think creating a way where there's a shared ownership of what we learned in the research is how to ensure that it will stick. And to me, that's PowerPoint is rarely the tool,
Yeah.
or Keynote or whatever. So to me, that's, and I'm in a different environment than I've been in for my whole career as a consultant for many decades, and now sort of working in an in-house team. I'm looking at my colleague Greg. That's why, and I'm finding it that to me is definitely sort of a struggle, figuring out how to create immersive ways of engaging people with the research. And also in the era of remote work as well, which becomes a challenge. But I'd love to hear what people are doing.
Yeah, and I bet there are people out here in the audience who are like, I don't feel like we're the Department of Broken Records. Like, we've overcome that. Please share how you did that. And
testing. Check. All right, cool.
You're on. Hot mic.
Interestingly, I hear that there is being a broken record is an element of frustration. But I feel like that's also there's an aspect of that that's part of the role of keeping an insight fresh and on top of people's minds. I think relying on repositories, slides, or even immersive experiences starts taking a passive position in the insight. And so I think there's an aspect of efficiency that we have to achieve. But I feel that it is our responsibility to, at the very least, be a bit of a squeaky wheel, because our organizations are constantly growing, constantly changing, new people coming in, and over time, UX, our insights are creating a pretty rich body of work that people aren't going to dig into. They're not going to seek out. They need to be sort of shown that information and shown that knowledge. And so I think it's about the tone at which we repeat that communication, and maybe the process through which we do that.
Right. And another thing that kind of helped me flip the broken records thing too is like something that my sister Steph and I talk about sometimes, is like, I think that it's obvious and that everybody should know this thing because I know it so deeply. I am like living it and feeling it and breathing it, but you don't know it. So why should I feel resentful that I'm telling it to you or telling it even to you 10 times? You've got a million things going on. Like, remove that resentment and just be like, I'm treating this as fresh even if it's not, right? This is fresher, we're bringing something new to it. And I love the idea of action and insight. Like, an insight isn't, that's why repositories are like a very hard thing for me, because a line and an Airtable or something like that, like, that's not active. What's somebody supposed to do with that? Like, our job is to bring that to life, right? Sorry, I'm on a little soapbox here.
I wanted to actually amplify the point that was made there earlier about empathizing with the other disciplines. So we did a bunch of interviewing of PMs saying, how do you want, the insights?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a big keynote, or we don't use PowerPoint, we use Keynote, but do you want a keynote presentation?
Yeah.
Or do you want to just work together on what that insight is and translation of that into, an epic in AHA, which is our tool we're using? That's what they want. They want to shorten, they want to, the distance between the insight that we got from a user and getting it into the very thing that's going to drive it into the product. And you don't have to necessarily have this whole presentation or like a recording. Like we have a big repository, and when I first took the job, it existed, and I went through a whole lot of it. I think, why did we spend an hour presenting all this stuff? The net of it was all of like maybe 5 minutes worth that needed to get into the product or whatever. A lot of the rest of it was context or whatever, right? And I find that we should be, even if we're going to do presentation, it should be in that form. But I think it should just be a collaboration, a conversation, and some metrics or whatever. But I think we need to empathize with our users, our internal users.
Yeah, actually, Taylor from my team, who's here somewhere, she's actually in the process of doing this right now. There she is, with our executives and our internal stakeholders to say, like, how do you want, she's embarking on a really big foundational project, how do you want me to deliver this to you? Like, how can I best communicate this to you in a way that's not pushing it, but like we're all involved in that as well, which has been really great.
That came up in one of our groups as well, but more in the context of impact that you had brought up, and how do you know that you're making impact, and what's the best way to make impact? And let's see, Amber, you shared something that I thought was awesome and required a little bit of bravery on the part of the researchers. So can you share?
Hello. All right. I honestly, it's not groundbreaking, but I just shared that I spoke up in a space where, I'm gonna call it like it is, Julie. Okay.
You can.
We can count the number of Black people in the room. I know that sometimes understanding doesn't come as easily as I may have wanted it to, and so looking for impact and value and trying to come up with that articulation and those words wasn't always easy for me. So I found my advocates, but that also meant that I had to kind of bypass my manager at times. And I had to say, hey, Nikki, we met at the water cooler. I like your hair, I like your kicks. That's where it starts. And then we learn each other. And then I said, hey, can you tell me what value the research or that I'm bringing to your team is? And then she gave me the language, and I'm using Nikki obviously as an example here, but she gave me the language to know what impact I was bringing to the table as a UX researcher, because as someone who was new at the time and who didn't look like everybody, I didn't know what words to use for people to hear me. So instead of kicking and screaming, I was like, can you just tell me what it is I do well for you? And that worked for me.
That's so powerful. Thank you, Amber.
And I liked when she brought that up as well, because you said, I remember you were saying that there were junior people on the team, or even you yourself was junior at the time, and having that kind of like proactiveness. And John, actually, in my second group as well, put your hand up so he can bring you a microphone. He also talked about build relationships, and I was kind of pressing him a little bit. I was like, no, tactically, how do you do that? And he's saying all the things around like empathizing, things like that. I'm like, no. Like you're actually in Chicago, I'm in San Francisco. I just started at the company. I've never even heard your name. How do you do that? So can you talk a little bit about that and your catchphrase for?
Sure. Is it on? Hi, I'm John from Samsung. I guess I accidentally stumbled on the phrase being a good nuisance, and just sort of not nagging, but like being there and making sure that the things that I'm trying to tell you, that I'm speaking the language that you're speaking, that I understand your needs, that I can try to help you with that. Just sort of be a nuisance and sort of be there when you need me, and demonstrate that expertise and demonstrate that I understand what's important to you, so that when I come by the next time and the next time, it's maybe less of a nuisance and more like, oh, all right, well, this guy over here.
This guy again.
Yeah, but, and so we all move forward together. I will say for people who are junior on the team, like at the previous company I was at, we ended up creating like actionable sheets that sort of demonstrate like, these are the key things. If you take anything from this sheet of paper right here, it's like, these are the 5 things that you need to know about like the fundamentals of what we do. And like, you can come ask me questions by all means, but like, these are the 5 things that you have to know to move forward and be successful with understanding the user or their physical constraints or whatever it is. So
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful in that about like articulating your work and your intentions in a really clear way, because there is a lot of that. Nobody really understands research, or, you know, there's a lot of fear about that, but there's a lot of reality about that too. And just like really simple, clear things. Like I remember at LinkedIn once, there was all this like, we don't know what you all do. And I just like, okay, let me just break it down. We do foundational work, formative work, and evaluative work. And I made like a little Venn diagram and blah, 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 I have shift-free words. Everybody was like, oh, that's really helpful. So like these simple frameworks we can share make a huge difference for our teams.
I think that's totally true, but it's just coming across me now, but this is going to be an ongoing thing for researchers. We're the curious ones, we're willing to be vulnerable and introspective, and we're always going to be asking, are we doing the right thing? And I don't think that I'm realizing like, oh, we should just pretend like we know exactly, like we're the imposter syndromes for what we're doing, like in our roles. We don't see other folks do that. They probably do though, but anyway, the whole point is, what if that's just built into it?
Yeah, what if it's a feature, not a bug?
That's right. Like what if that's what we bring? That's actually what we bring, is being able to be vulnerable and introspective.
I think that's a really interesting tension kind of in the kite metaphor for us to pull on, is like, how can we still be free and be curious and be those people that we are, but also be like grounded and tethered and make sure that people know this kite's not just going to bust off and fly away. Like, what are you people even doing? You know, there's a balance between having to create some boundaries and some clarity and some of that freedom as well, because I think that is a unique kind of quality that we bring to business conversations, but it's kind of at our own peril in some ways, right? Or at least it feels that way. I don't know. Carl, it felt like you were about to say something.
I was going to say that, yeah, I had a supervisor years ago when I was in clinical psychology, and he always made the point that the disciplines that we're in don't have a house in which to practice. So if you're in, clinical psychology in a hospital, for example, it's medicine that is the core. Every decision is made. They're never going to be kicked out, right? And same thing with if you're in a technology company, engineering is the foundational discipline. So we're always sort of a guest, if you will. So we always need to make our work known. We need to constantly advocate for ourselves. There are times when we're really doing well. Look at all the companies that no longer have chief design officers over the last year. Companies that you thought were, including Apple, companies that you thought were just really got it in terms of this whole focus on design and research. And so it constantly has to be part of our role to make everybody aware of why this is important. It's weird that we have to do that, especially for UX research, when you think of that. We're the ones that actually provide that insight to be able to know what the hell you're doing as a company. And somehow people don't get that naturally is really weird.
It's like the most important thing that nobody understands.
Exactly. It's the best kept secret in a company. That what about you had this dedicated research staff that are going to tell you what your clients want and evaluate how well you're actually delivering on that. Such a simple thing, right? And to think that companies think they can do that without it, but we still need, because we're not engineering.
I'm so curious about that.
To do that.
Go ahead. No, I was going to pitch something out there.
I was keying off of it sounds so simple. I think the executives want and they understand that they want to know, is their product working well, or get feedback in order to steer their direction. What they don't know is, why do I have to hire a researcher to do that, right? And so we talked at one of my tables about there's always this inherent tension when it comes to that democratization. Because on the one hand, we as researchers are like, yes, we should democratize and you can do some stuff and free up my time to do other things. But on the flip side, we're like, wait, but we're valuable, please keep us employed, right? And so Martha, can we get a microphone? I just thought this was so fun, the way that she kind of tackled this with something she did that had two different purposes behind it.
Yeah, I had sort of a super double secret purpose, but a great inclusive curriculum to help my colleagues. Is when I worked at Accenture, kind of understand what what we do in research and how to do it well. So I created a course called How Not to Suck at Interviewing, because I think that's one of the things that it's very easy to assume interviewing someone, it's a piece of cake. You just sit down and talk to them. Well, as we all know, I'm sure everyone in this room, there's actually a ton of skill involved. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do it well. And so my intent with the course was to, yes, actually we had an interesting conversation at the table about the word democratization and how we need a better word, because I think it's a reality, and it's many of our jobs require us to kind of open the gates to the castle of research, but in an effort to kind of help teach, I created this course, which it did. It sort of helped explain this is how you do it well, and this is how to practice it, because you're only going to get good at it by practicing. But it's sort of the double secret motivation was to help my students understand how hard it is, and that you need expertise in order to do it well, and that actually their assumption that anyone can do it was flawed. And so I think I accomplished both goals quite well.
Yes, talking to people is not interviewing people. Yes.
Yeah, at my company, we did something similar at a like on-site that we had. It was about 100 people, various disciplines, product engineering, design, customer support, and the researchers ran a workshop on how to not ask leading questions. And they would put up a question and they're like, how would you reword this to not be leading anymore? And it was like dead silent, or the few brave people who tried to give an option, and the researchers are like, not quite. So I think by the end of that, people were really like, oh, I need to, let me come and talk to you next time. Like, you know, and again, it wasn't to scare them off from doing it at all, but maybe to get into that, hey, like, even if you're going to do something, why don't you run it by us and we can read it quickly and give you some pointers or tips, or take the really big projects on ourselves and work with us.
Yeah.
My perspective is that as researchers, we are here to help people make better decisions. So to me, democratization, similar to impact, is also a trap. Like, it's part of our job. We're supposed to help people and give them what they need to make better decisions, including training them, give them documentation, creating templates.
Yep.
But I'm going to put Tammy Tayo on the spot. Where are you? You felt that democratization was not something that we should be doing. And I was curious if you wanted to explain your point of view.
Thank you. Well, actually, I do think we need democratization, but I just think we need to be very thoughtful in how it is that we implement it. Put in guardrails, right? Finding platforms like, you know, Dscout or other competitors to help automate, I think, is where I stand. And there are other people that just feel as though we should have everybody do research, which to me really defeats the purpose. Because when you're thinking of expanding what UXR is, part of that is making sure that we're doing due diligence and expanding that. And it means we've got to get people that are upskilled, people that can actually do this and do it well. And if we're not very thoughtful in how we roll out democratization, how then do we expand this, right? How do we make sure that we're vetting these people? How do we make sure that the processes and things that we are doing is actually well thought out? And you can't do that by just saying, yeah, everybody else should do it. So yeah, I think we could do democratization. We just got to be very thoughtful in how we approach it and how we implement it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there are some kind of upsides that Martha was talking about a little bit too. Is like, once you start training people and educating them and opening the, you know, gate to the castle, people realize this is harder than I thought, right? So there's kind of some respect that starts to build as we do that. At least in my observation.
Time consuming.
It's very time consuming and difficult, it turns out.
That's when you get into specialist roles for any discipline, right? Oh, we need a specialist for this because it's taking my generalists too much time to do that particular thing.
Yeah. Roy, I know you had some great conversations too.
Yeah, I was with table 3 and 4. Shout out to best tables here. Sorry, the rest of you, but I'm biased. The best tables ever. You know, there's this connected conversation around that tension of being connected to design. You know, one of the things that we talked about. Sorry, I forget your name. I forget all your names. So I'm really sorry. I should have written them down, but it is what it is. You know, being sort of on the design side and how to
how we interact with, say, like a voice of customer, right? As much as maybe some researchers here dread NPS, which I know there are some among us, don't have to put up your hand, but it's all good. I understand. The reality is, whether it's NPS or something else, use of voice of customer, it's a really powerful program that execs pay a lot of attention to. So how do we marry this whole, we're going to also be strategic. We're also going to like come together with other insights groups, but still maintain some level of control. So like how do we structure things so that can happen? Also a really interesting conversation about doing strategic work and the benefits of being close to strategy, but also the decoupling from the practical work that goes on and being able to be connected into the on-the-ground effect of product work. So these are sort of tensions that I think are not, I don't think there's like a full answer, but the dream of, hey, it'd be great to have like an insights person on exec, but also as we talked about, there's 1,000 engineers and like 2 researchers. So there's probably not going to be a VP research in all these companies, or a chief insights officer. So how do we sort of marry all of these tensions? No like clear answer, but I think some interesting ideas that popped up. I think another one, Joni like caught the tail end of this conversation, was being close to the money. Being able to, like a really good example, again, sorry I forgot your name, but really closely tied to what the CEO cares about, which is money. And so the framing of research or insights around like, what are the potential downstream effects on this revenue-wise? I think a question in my mind is like, how do you scale that to teams? Like, I think something that's married to this is having skin in the game. Like, how do you have skin in the game in a way that maybe is not the same as product management, but is closer than we have been, right? And I think that's also connected to being closer to the money. So yeah, these are like really challenging ideas to try and implement, whether you're a small team or a larger team. But I think they all connect to how you structurally, how UX are structured and placed within these orgs to really have an effect. So call out any one of y'all who talked about these things. I think they're definitely worth sort of saying in your own words. So feel free. Actually, I'd love any one of you to talk on any of those points.
Roy's waving his hands over here,
The
so I am
incredible
too.
3
Anybody
and 4
over there?
tables. Yeah.
Want to chime in? Okay, cool.
I'm Brian. I work for Providence Big Health System. I probably talked about VOC a little bit. I invite them into my projects. I'm a service designer now, but like, why fight that? I mean, usually our insights are aligned and go deeper even. So I think it gives the business types comfort when they see our insights, but then it's also backed up maybe in a little footnote somewhere of, hey, did you see this VOC report, or did you see this white paper or this literature review? It just puts wind in our sails. So I say, embrace it all.
Yeah. It's actually a good segue. We're going to be talking a lot about this type of thing, the money. We're going to be talking about the money this afternoon a little bit, and lots of other interesting topics. So it's a good segue. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering if there are any other highlights that we wanted to.
Yeah, I realized, so I want to make sure table 7 is properly represented because I completely ignored you. I want to say sorry. But if anybody from table 7 here wants to share some highlights that you talked about, maybe just like one or even just one key point, I'll make one up if you don't.
Table 7, where are you at?
I'll talk about beans. Greg's interested too.
An ode to beans. Okay, well, while table 7 prepares their thoughts, Greg, did you have any other highlights you wanted to share?
I just was looking at my notes, and this is something Joey touched on, but somebody at our table 9, best table, sorry, other folks.
Table 11, you know you're the best.
Somebody noted that engineers will take credit. We built and shipped that thing. Designers will take credit. We designed and shipped this thing that people are using. Researchers do not. we don't take credit, we don't take ownership, because again, the impact is diffuse, like I mentioned earlier, but we are diplomats, we are collaborators. And I was curious if anybody here has maybe a different opinion or can speak to maybe why we are so loath to take credit for our work. Maybe you do take credit, and I'm curious how you do that. Doesn't have to be table 9, it could be any of the other lesser tables.
I don't have an answer to it, but to build on it, it's making me think of something else that maybe is a little bit related, but because I think Julie was talking about being strategic earlier and how being strategic, involves opinion. And a big conflict and tension that I've been thinking about that's been at the back of my mind is, I fancy myself a very strategic researcher. I think part of why I, have moved into leadership is because of the ability to make my research very strategic. And I think being strategic has overlap with like taking ownership and having strong opinions. But I have this tension in the back of my head that I'm worried about, which is I feel like the more strategic I am as a researcher, the less objective and more biased I worry that I'm bringing that to my research practice a little bit. And those two things, being strategic and being objective and unbiased, to me feel like a big tension. And I'm a little worried about it. And so, yeah, I'm just curious if others, for some reason, taking ownership reminded me of that, I think, because it's like we're the diplomats, we're the objective ones. But then you kind of have to play the game.
Yeah. I always encourage my team to like, just be clear about what you're talking about. Like, now I'm talking about the findings. Now I'm talking about, the results of this study. Okay, now I'm talking about my perspective on that. When I'm bringing in my business acumen, my experience, all of the triangulating, all these other things. Now I have an opinion and recommendations and implications based on that. So just being like really clear when you're doing one or doing the other can help.
Getting to the question of how we can take credit, I have found the hard way, particularly when performance reviews come, that if you're not really specific about what you've done, then you might not be in a place where decisions are being made. And so I've become crazy explicit about what I've accomplished. Like, drivers would not be getting paid what they're paid without my mental model of earnings, period. Like, it wouldn't. We wouldn't have built these features if I didn't know if I didn't do the 10 pain points kind of thing. Like, it's almost like writing your resume kind of thing. And it feels uncomfortable because that isn't who we are as people. We're mostly introverts. But it's this is a kind of business, right? And and then you kind of feel proud about what you've done.
Yeah, and I think as leaders, like if we switch our hats from like researchers to research leaders, like it's our job to make sure our teams are getting credit, to insert that when it's not being recognized. If engineering and product are taking credit, Marissa can, and lots of people remember, like all these big celebration emails would go out about shipping a product and research wouldn't be mentioned. I'd be right away, reply all, like, also, here's the research team that did all the research to support this. And eventually that stopped happening. People started including that.
I think that there's also a fear that people have. And I've seen this on the design side. I've seen it on the research side. I see it in product management as well, but it's like, too bad, that's my job. And that's signing up for the actual impact of your influence. Because it is really easy when something fails for you to be like, broken record, I told you so, right?
Yeah.
I knew the finding. If you would have listened to me, that would have been successful. It's a lot harder to say, I believe so much in these findings. If you make this decision, I will share whether it succeeds or not. And you're like, but I don't have all that business side. That's the empathy for your partners. Sometimes you build a thing and it works really, really well and it still fails. And it followed all the research and still failed because sometimes build it and they don't come, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why business leaders are making decisions based on a lot of different inputs, not just research, and safe to be like, oh, but this is my
That's
role,
true.
right?
I think there's a lot
And
of
it's
truth
hard.
to that.
I have a hard time with that. I am responsible for metrics, actual metrics at the company that I do not 100% control. And it's scary, but that's what leaders are looking for. So be brave, I guess.
Yeah, be brave. Yeah.
That was one of the discussions that we had in the team over here, the perceived disagreement between Greg and myself in terms of the owning impact, right? And my argument was that if we don't go down that path at all, then we never get to have any credit for what we've done. I think it's on us as researchers, especially quantitative researchers, to actually analyze that in a way that, for example, some years ago, I did a study that looked at basically the hierarchical regression on dependent measures of customer satisfaction and revenue, and a whole bunch of factors like number of users bringing into studies, a whole bunch of different variables. And we got to the outcome of these three variables could explain something like 27% of the variance in revenue. We haven't done that for a number of years. I want to get back there again. So then you can say, okay, you know what? The big debate about, well, we had some input to this. Well, you can quantify that. That's our responsibility as researchers to up our game and don't just do the study and leave it there and say, well, I think we had impact with it. I think we should be upping our game to actually be able to do it.
I love it. That's a great note for us to, I just want to, we have a few minutes left. Anybody holding on to anything up here, out there, something you disagreed with or you know, yeah, or agreed with?
Hi, yeah, my name is Kristen, and just like a quick thing about kind of taking credit, and I feel like a lot of times we as researchers wait until we have a really impactful finding that we think that can go all the way through, and we don't do a great job of kind of like showing our work throughout, right? Like we're not a kind of constantly updating people on how things are going, and a lot of to the point earlier about we don't move fast enough sometimes, right? Or that's a perception. I think that sometimes just like, I just got out of an interview, this was like an amazing quote kind of thing. Like you're just like kind of keeping in the top of people's minds, right? Like it doesn't always have to be a perfectly worded deck or summary finding, right? Like, but to just be kind of constantly putting your work out to your stakeholders, to your collaborators, you know, and I think that then keeps you front of mind in terms of the entire initiative or the entire project or development of that feature or whatever it is. So then when it comes time in the end, they're like, oh yeah, remember when we learned that thing, right? Like as opposed to just like a real build up, here's a push and then I'm gone again because I'm working on this.
I think it's a great reframe of impact. Like we think of impact as like this big thing. It's like, boom, impact. You can see the cartoon explosion, but impact can be little, right? Like little tiny things that you do throughout the day, the week, the month, the year, that add up to those big moments.
But exactly to that, and Kristen, thanks for raising that, because the flip side is, or not the flip side, but I see it all the time, is being too protective of wanting the data and information we share to be exactly what we want to go out into the world. But that's back to bad data, you know, in quotes, just rough data, whatever. Bad data is better than no data. And so exactly to that, just sharing quickly, widely, and being a part of decisions quicker.
Yeah, yeah.
I would add one other thought, that when you think of like what Intel did with Intel Inside, because it was like, it wasn't something you could see. Well, a lot of the work we do is not observable. Like you said before, somebody's writing the code, somebody's doing the design. What did we, you know, contribute? So I think we have to do that extra step. And it really depends on what your organization is, like the conversation, and if you have a small team, like you've got all the impact that you've had in your head, right? And you share it with the leadership team and like, in my company, it's huge. And so actually I do an executive dashboard and an executive newsletter once a quarter that communicates things, and I have like journalists, people that have journalism backgrounds writing the content, so it's not what a researcher would write.
Yeah.
It's like they take the stuff the researchers wrote and put it into really catchy headline and really all that. Huge value to this, because here's all the senior executives in the company reading this stuff saying, I had no idea, including things like, we did this piece of research that killed this project. that's not an impact in terms of like, well, now here's the success of the market, but here's the money we saved in terms of what we didn't do. So I think you have to figure out what's appropriate for your organization. My mind is always big because we've got a large company, but I think doing the equivalent in your organization, but making your equivalent of Intel inside in terms of its UXR inside, if you will.
Well, yeah, I don't know about you all, but I'm envisioning insight inside based on that. That's going to be smacked on every darn thing that goes out. We have time for one more question or comment.
Yay. Both?
Great.
It's actually building on two things that Carl, you said. Going back to Marty Kagan, he really emphasizes the product engineering design triad, which we adopt at Squarespace. And I found that one of the most useful relationships that we've built through that is through engineering, because they understand the tech debt that at least we face a lot. And if a insight isn't adopted or something isn't built the way that our team has recommended, we always go ask and say, why? Why? And then they always come back with really insightful explanations, which helps us deliver our insights more effectively. The second thing was talking about something you said when we first began this discussion like an hour and a half ago about making research a scarcity. I found that if we have staffed a team that is not basically treating our researchers well or the insights well, we get them out of there. Like, it's not a good use of that person's time. It's not setting us up for winning or like perception. And so I would encourage people to do that more often.
Yeah.
Huge plus those points. One is I think that we need to become, so I want Marty Kagan in his next revision of the book to be talking about 4 in a box and not 3 in the box, because we deserve to be that 4th box, quite frankly, but we have to earn it. Right?
I love that.
And I think the other point about taking people off projects that aren't successful, when I took my job, I went around and interviewed everybody, and there was a team of like 4 researchers that worked for like 3 or 4 months on something that had no impact whatsoever. I said, sorry, we're taking the researchers off that project. That it's not appropriate. Partly it was the responsibility of the researchers too, though. It was basically a team that took the approach of an outsourcing of research. They had the conversation with the product manager. They launched the study that took 3 months to do or whatever, and then delivered the results. It's like, my God, weren't you working with PM all the way along? They should be in everyone. Like, even Marty Kagan says that PM should be in every study that a UX researcher does, which I think is crazy because they never get any work done. But they should at least be in enough of them. And if they change their direction in terms of product strategy, damn it, they should have known, right? So I think it's alignment is the other major point as well. But I love the approach of like pulling researchers out when they're not being effective.
And now we have a goal to be the 4th leg of the stool. We can do this. We are out of time. It's lunchtime. And please join me in thanking our panel for coming and joining us and for all their pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much. Yes.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's me again. I hope you all felt so inspired. So many gems there. If you're interested in more, digging a lot deeper into impact, ROI, value, and then also weaving in ethics and integrity of our practice onto that, stay tuned. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we're going to launch right into the next video of the next set of panels. So why don't you get us started? Take it away and see you on the other side, everybody. Let's keep the chat lively. It's been going great.
Well, first I want to share how we have some divisions on this panel as well. Greg does not believe that there are aliens among us.
Did I say that? Oh, yeah, okay, fair enough.
But Lisa and Todd do believe that there are aliens among us, so.
I live with one.
I think you might be one.
I might actually be.
You might actually be one. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start with Lisa. Lisa, welcome to CoLab. We're so happy you're here. Lisa has been in the research and insights game for a long time. and partnered with many of the world's largest brands. She's sits in Minneapolis and is EVP for market research at Ipsos. She is on the boards of the American Marketing Association, and many, I mean, I could have filled many index cards with all the boards and organizations that Lisa is involved with. She's really passionate about the field and about helping people get into the field and empowering people. She also serves, we shared some service on the board at the University of Wisconsin for Center for Marketing Research Excellence. Lisa still serves on that board. I do not anymore, but that's how I met Lisa. And we're just so thrilled that you're here with us today. So thank you, Lisa.
Julie. And I'll say, Julie was the only UX
I was
researcher on the board.
Yeah, it was the
She
Center
educated
for
us.
Marketing Research, and I was like, let me get in there. And literally my main message to everybody was like, go meet your user research team whenever you get into your big organization. All right, Greg, a People Nerds contributor extraordinaire, I thought you were in New York, but I just overheard that you're in Michigan.
I'm in Connecticut.
Wasn't you.
Right now you're in Chicago.
Now I'm in Chicago, yes. Current, present.
Let's get back to aliens, shall we? All right. Greg holds a dual MBA and JD from Williams and Mary University, so he brings unique perspectives of deep business knowledge and legal perspective to UXR. He's been at Chase for over 6 years, and I was going to mention the cannabis Hawaii thing, but you beat me to that. At Chase, he is currently the Executive Director for User Experience Research for Consumer Banking. So really excited to have you here as well. And last but not least, Todd McCullough, coming to us from the great state of Tennessee. Todd holds an MBA in Strategy and Marketing from Vanderbilt, where he is now an adjunct professor at the Owen Graduate School of Management. He was the managing director at Doblin, which is where I met him, and subsequently Monitor for many years. A small stint as the head of marketing for Subway sandwiches. Ask him about that later. And runs his own agency and consulting firm called Ampersand, which he has done for years as well. He is also an adjunct professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology's Institute of Design, where he's recently revived his professorship there and is leading a class called Metrics That Matter to graduate students in the field of design. So really excited to assemble this group.
And I think I knew Julie as she was starting her illustrious career in user experience research.
From the beginning.
From the beginning in the last century.
It was another century. That's true. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Really appreciate it. So we're going to dig into the hot topic, one of the main things that came out in our survey and in our discussions that we need to talk about, which is the ROI and the value of our work. It came up this morning already. It's going to always continue to come up in whatever we're talking about, but we're going to really dig into like some really great examples and stories of how our panel has addressed that. And we'll start with Greg. So tell us about your team, the unique perspectives that you bring, and how you create business value. We've had some great talks about this. I can't wait for you to share them.
Sure. So let's do some context setting first. We all come from different size teams. For some context setting, at Chase Bank, we have about 140 user experience researchers across the organization. My team, we have about 15 that report to me that are focused on our consumer banking products, so checking accounts, savings accounts, debit cards, ATMs, et cetera. When you walk into a bank with an octagon on it, chances are my team had something to do with that experience. And because I work at the largest bank in America, it's hard to find a company that cares more about numbers and profit and metrics. But I will say, first, you said there was going to be some provocations here and the difference between our panels.
Oh, yes.
I love the folks on that side. I can't wait to hear about them.
It's not an us versus them.
Right. Equitable research is a critical part of our job, too, even at the largest bank in America.
In fact, that's the People Nerds piece that you wrote was heavily talking about that. So yeah.
Yes, it was focused on how we do equitable research at Chase and inclusive research practices. I lead our legal research practice, which is kind of like an internal ethics review board for our research and risk council. But all that to say, we care deeply about metrics and numbers and how do we quantify the value of our work. there are a number of different ways that we measure impact. Obviously, impact to our customer, impact to our product, but also impact to our process and impact to our people internally. Those are kind of the ways that I think about impact. And my big provocation and challenge to all of you is to not just think about research as a way to build brand new, amazing ideas, but also to think about yourself as a risk mitigation tool and a risk mitigation part of the organization. This is critical for me and my team and everybody at Chase as we think about talking about the value of our work. We have nothing but ideas at Chase. We have 250,000 employees, and so we have billions of ideas to choose from every year. Our senior leaders, especially on the product side, will say over and over again, the things I say no to are more important than the things that I say yes to because of how many ideas that we have. So a lot of the value of our work is about helping to try and figure out what things should we say no to? How do we identify additional risks to the business, additional risks to the customer, additional risks to researchers and employees? And that is something that you can quantify, and I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Well, I mean, yeah, we'd love to hear about that. Actually, like, I think about, I had some projects in my history too where saying no was like the huge value that I provided, but then looking back and trying to get another job, I was like, how do I talk about the value of that, right? Like, it's kind of an invisible thing to say no, things disappear. Like, how do you...
Sure.
We talked earlier on the earlier panel about like making sure people understand the impact that you had. So how do you talk about that with execs and stuff?
Yeah, great question. So there are two different ways that I talk about the impact of saying no. First, there are projects that we shelve, right? So we will do work and we'll say we should not move forward with this thing. That's a really easy thing to quantify. One example, I can't talk about the actual thing that we shut down because who knows, maybe it'll come back again. But last year we were considering producing a new product and we wanted to test that in the branches. To pilot something in the branches across 20, 30 branches or so would have cost us $10 to $15 million to do. And we know how much it costs to do that, right? We have a lot of historical data about how much these things cost. We had to price it out for finance. Well, instead of spending a quarter or 2 quarters, right? Instead of spending 6 months and $15 million to find out this thing was a bad idea, we spent 6 weeks and $10,000 to $15,000 probably sending people out into the field, doing the research that you all are very well equipped to do, to come back and say, this is no good. Please don't do this. Stop. And that was honestly copy paste $10, $15 million from a financial spreadsheet into my end of year performance review. Like at that moment, we saved the company $15 million this year from this one project because we prevented them from doing something that would have been expensive and catastrophic and would have caused customer confusion. So that's one really easy way to quantify saying no. The second way is by bringing forward the projects that you said yes to. Right? So every time you say no to something, it's because you're saying yes to other things. It's about prioritization. And so we do this is something my manager really hammers home. She's the chief design officer for the consumer bank holistically. And we are very explicit about laying out here are the projects that we're doing and the value to the business. And here are the projects that we're not doing and the potential value to the business, right? So this is what you're leaving on the floor. But if we did these things that we're saying no to, we can't do all of the things that we've said yes to. So now you're risking sacrificing the value of these high priority, high value projects. And you have to the last panel, you have to take credit for that as research. You're part of the team that contributes to these decisions. You might not be the person who ultimately decides yes or no, but you're part of that team and therefore you have to own that decision and you get to own that value as well. So it's not just about generating revenue, it's about cutting down expenses, saving money and understanding how your prioritized book of work contributes to the value that you create.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear from the rest of the group over the course of the afternoon, like other ways that people are doing this and kind of thinking about that kind of bottom line impact. And there's so many ways to think about impact. We've already touched on some of them over the course of the day. And I have more questions for you, but I want to move over to Lisa and ask her, as a market research professional, I always tell myself that market research does a better job of this than user research, right? That at like delivering the message of how insights result in impact. I don't know, is that true or not? Do you feel like market research is better at that? And if so, why?
I mean, I think there are areas where it's really easy in market research with quantitative data to show impact. Some of the work that we do is designed to showcase the financial impact. For example, if we're doing a marketing mix modeling study or a volume forecasting study, there's very specific dollars that are the finding from that work. And so it's easy to prove the value of the work. Where it becomes more difficult is when we're working on something strategic, like nuances associated with a brand or something that won't come to fruition until years in the future with innovation, then it becomes a lot trickier. But I love the notion of what do you say no to? And I think that there's communication that all of us could get better on up front with our stakeholders. You know, what if we do no research? You know, what will happen? What will you do? Will our research make a difference in that path? Sometimes not, right? Sometimes they just want to validate what they're going to do anyway. I also love the idea of tracking. I mean, you can keep, even though it's not the nature perhaps of some in the room, you can keep a spreadsheet of the work that you do. Was the advice from that work taken and what was the financial impact? Also, I'd say really listen to what your CEO is saying in investor calls. Whatever those words are, whatever he or she is articulating matters. Try to tie your work back to that and don't make it clever. Use the words that were used in those calls, because then there's a really easy way to see that you're adding value or having an impact.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So how do you advise your clients to ensure impact? Like, I know you work with a lot of really huge brands, and you've told us a little bit about the roundtables that you do. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
We do. We host roundtables. I think we have about 6 of them in place right now, and there's about 10 insights leaders from various companies on each of them, and we talk about how to make an impact a lot. And some accounts say, hey, we aren't asked. Our management trusts us so much that we don't feel like we have to come with a dollar amount. I would argue leadership can change, and having that dollar amount in your pocket, even if you don't need to share it frequently, is in your best interest. But some people measure it in different ways. Some measure it by, you know, looking at data in the broader universe, like the McKinsey study that shows that design-driven companies have, I think it's 23% stronger revenue and 56% stronger shareholder value. I mean, just being able to throw things like that out catches attention. Some say, hey, every time the work that we do is mentioned by the CEO publicly, that's a green check mark for us. And so it really varies from company to company.
Yeah. Something you touched on that kind of relates to the conversations we were having this morning, especially at Table 11, shout out, was like strategic foundational work is seen as like the sexier kind of work, the more appealing kind of work that researchers want to do. But it's harder to demonstrate the impact of that, whereas the stuff that's kind of down the line, more on delivery side, is seen as maybe like, oh, you know, that's for junior people or whatever, not as sexy, but that's where we're really, you know, able to demonstrate like the business impact that we have. So I think that's maybe something we can think about and like flip.
I don't agree.
Oh, good. Tell me why.
I think it's the opposite.
Oh, say more.
Yeah, I think that the larger your work, the more strategic it is, the more impact it likely has on the bottom line, whether you're saving expenses or generating revenue.
In the examples that you shared, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, right, fair. So maybe not for everybody, but for a usability study, it is often very difficult to take that and turn it into an exact revenue. I mean, maybe you.
We got to get Kevin involved in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
because I think you can. Coming from LinkedIn, it was more like metrics, right? Like when you're doing usability, you can see like you fixed a thing, you made it easier to use. The metrics are better, the revenue's better. That was like an easier line to draw.
Yeah.
Whereas if we were doing a project that was like, let's learn about job seekers, for example, that was like really important information and it had a lot of impact on people, but it was harder to say like. It directly tied to this thing that we're doing. So I don't know. I think it's contextual and maybe in some
I think that's fair. And I think maybe with some of the strategic projects, you might not always be looking at, well, we produced $7 million more revenue, but we introduced a new product or we introduced a new feature and we're going to measure that over time.
Well, thank you for challenging my orthodoxy. I appreciate that. Keep it up. All right, Todd, let's turn to you. You spend a lot of time like thinking about how design speaks to business and business speaks to design and, you know, so many questions for you about that. I know you've learned a lot. What do you think are like the biggest hurdles for design or user research, as you've been hearing us talk about it, to speak business? Like, where do we get hung up?
Yeah, I guess I'll start by giving the disclaimer that I think I'm probably one of the least informed people today about what's been going on in user experience research of late, which also causes two good things for me. One, I've probably learned more than just about anybody between last night and today, number one. And number two, I'm also, though likely to maybe say things that are uninformed or ignorant in some ways about the reality that you're in, I would invite you to also use that as an opportunity to actually ask those questions. Maybe there are some orthodoxies that I'll challenge that you wouldn't ask if you really knew a whole lot about user experience research. So that's the setup that I'll give, which basically allows me to say anything I want. I guess the first thing I would say is, so I ran Doblin for a decade, met Julie and Steph and many others in the room during those years. So I've been around user research for, 25 plus years. So I know about it, but I don't really know this history that you went through today so well. And so the current state is kind of new to me. I'm really not tuned into that very much. But if I step back and think about communicating the value to the business, I would take the viewpoint as leaders. So it's a perfect audience for this. You guys are the ones in the driver's seat for your organization as it relates to user experience research. And I think it's this group of folks who could say, hey, let's zoom up and down the organization at all the different levels, from a project team, a product, a platform, maybe a category, a business within the business, and then the executive team. Think about all those different levels and try to understand, what are they dealing with? What are the things that they are challenged with? What are their pain points? Kind of use them like they were your users. Steph mentioned earlier, she wanted to get to know engineers, so she learned a lot more about engineering. Well, guess what? If you really want to appeal to the value at the different levels of the business, learn about those levels of the business, especially as the leaders. Talk to those people. Find a person. So a lot of this come up lately is it's not so much about the role as the person. Find the person that could be your partner. Find the person that could be your sponsor that can help you, number one, connect to those groups, and number two, learn about them. Learn more about those groups. So zooming up, zooming down across the organization, and then basically having a mission for your team that says, we want to have the most impact we can have on this company. We do things already that we do well. Maybe we don't get as much credit for them as we should in other parts of the business, because the other parts of the business don't even see it. They're not exposed to it. It's not in their everyday world. But I would argue, if we're people nerds, I've been in those executive rooms for 25 years, coaching CEOs and being senior executives of large companies. Guess what? They don't just care about money. It's not just about the money. And a lot of the things they care about are people things. They really care about their customers. They really care about their employees. They really care about that CFO that's a pain in the rear end that can't get out of the 1980s. They really care about getting current on what's going on in the world. And I think the capabilities that we bring to the table could be applied amazingly, even at that level. I think, was it Carl? Carl, from the previous one, from IBM, is he here? Mm-hmm. Several times when he was talking, I was nodding my head, yes, yes, yes. He said things like, I have an executive newsletter that goes to the executives that talks about issues. Could we find a way to get in the door to have updates at that level? Because trust me, here's the other thing about that executive boardroom or the executive team. It is so, I'm going to use the word imperfect. It's unbelievable, the stuff that goes on in those rooms. They are clueless about so many things. And it's not because they're dumb, but they're not utilizing the capabilities across the organization in that room, and decisions get made based on biases that an individual has that they brought from another company from 2 decades ago. So if we could do a much better job of saying, you know what, in this room, we're going to be responsible for our company's understanding of the customer, for our company's understanding of the experience, for our company's alignment around the situation that we're in. Let's take that approach. Let's say that's a part of our mission as a group. And oh yeah, we're going to do some great research on projects that inform new product development, but we're also going to figure out what's going on at the top, and then maybe we team up with other groups in the organization to solve the problems at each of those levels, zooming up and zooming down.
Well, and I'd like to add something to that in terms of promoting your personal brand and the brand of your team. I think in both insights and UX, if you think about a soccer team, there's defenders and there's strikers. I think we're defenders most of the time. We wait until work comes to us and then we respond or we say no, rather than being strikers and saying, hey, here's an issue that I know matters. I or my team are going to take this forward. We're going to be the ones to present it to the leadership team. We're not going to have a middleman. Think about that too. Is there even just once a year a time where you can be the striker? I think feeds into what you're saying.
Perfect.
I love it. We have to move on to our next panel, but Graham, there was a football reference for you. So yeah. Wow.
I'm just...
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll get back to kind of some cross-panel talk in a moment, but I want to thrilled to introduce our Doing It Right, Doing It Well panel, who are also divided on aliens, as it turns out. Alba is a yes. Aliens are among us.
I grew up on the X-Files. Like, it was the one show that my father allowed me to stay past bedtime to watch with him. So
same.
Huge fan. Huge fan.
Yeah, you can't deny it. Although Jonathan is not convinced, so.
Yeah, which is weird because I'm actually a huge sci-fi fan, but if any of you have heard of the Dark Forest hypothesis, we can talk about it.
Oh yeah, well, Adam, where are you? We'll be discussing this later. So I am thrilled to welcome two people nerds to the panel today. Alba joins us from Boston. Thank you for traveling out here. She has an academic background in sociology from Swarthmore College and speaks and writes extensively on matters that that involve social justice, racial justice, equity, fairness, and safety. She is currently a partner at Humanity Centered. If you aren't familiar with this organization, I highly recommend that you sign up for their content and their webinars as immediately, like right now. They are really helping us to challenge and transform human-centered design practices, and I'm very grateful for you and your team's work. She's currently an independent researcher focused on work with domestic violence, refugees, and healthcare organizations. So, Alba, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and we have Jonathan joining us from LA, obviously. You're looking great.
Wait, is there? Oh, I guess compared to the Midwest.
Exactly, exactly.
Wasn't
You're
the
stepping
sun
it
this
up.
weekend.
Jonathan, what's that?
Shots fired.
Well, I love your sweater.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Jonathan holds a master's in international development from the London School of Economics, worked for the US government for years in analytics and user experience research, and then pivoted to the private sector. He is now Senior Manager of Design Research for Headspace. So thank you both for being here as well. Alba, I'm going to start with you. I'm so excited to hear your perspective. I think Greg kind of teed it up nicely, like these things are not in diametric opposition to each other, right? Like ethics and inclusion and diversity in our practice aren't in opposition of ROI and value. So, but before we get to that, tell us a little bit about Humanity Centered and how Humanity Centered supports user researchers to do the kind of personal work that supports the professional work.
Well, I think that's actually kind of the provocation that I wanted to start off with.
Great.
I think, for an industry that prides itself for being so human-centered, we often don't focus on those foundational social and psychological skills that we need in order to really do our best professional work. I think we need to kind of contextualize what does it mean to be a user researcher in 2023, right? Like, many of us have experienced mass layoffs, or if we have survived a reorg, We're now understaffed and overscheduled. We are the people who are advocating for ethical best practices for organizations that are often really resistant towards that. We're always trying to advocate for the value of our job. We have to hold space for participants who are often sharing really difficult stories with us about how they are struggling with our products, or even just what is going on in their world outside of our product. And on top of that, we are individually and as a society experiencing the long-term impact of COVID-19, war, climate change, systemic racism, and we have to hold all of that as researchers. We have to come to our work every day, acknowledging that and still being able to function. We are an incredibly overwhelmed and traumatized profession. And so what we really try to do at Humanity Centered is give folks a little bit of relief, right? By trying to equip them with the skills, which we often call emotional endurance, right? That's the way that we're able to relate to ourselves and our work as individuals. And then we also try to equip teams with the strategies and practices to create what we call systems of care, right? The ability to still function and maybe even possibly thrive despite all of the things that are going on around us. So we always try to divide it like that: emotional endurance and systems of care.
Yeah. How do you, I think I've personally benefited from the programming and coaching that I've gotten from you and Vivian, but, you know, at an organizational level, you work with a lot of people from a lot of organizations, some of the biggest organizations. How do you think at a systemic or organizational level to help people make time for this, to help research teams, research leaders, but also across the organization to recognize the importance of this and create space for it?
I think kind of like Greg, we often talk about the significance of loss when we're trying to advocate for the value of this type of work, right? You know, what we have been observing when we're going into all of these different organizations that are across different disciplines and industries, that, you know, researchers are leaving because of burnout. They are having lower productivity. They are not performing as well as they should, right? And so there is an HR loss within these organizations that we can actually quantify really well. And I think something that we're also starting to recognize patterns in is that we are losing a lot of very talented, experienced researchers. I think they are one of the fastest growing groups that are leaving the industry because they have been forced to not only be overworked and all of that, but I think that they're feeling a sort of what we call moral injury, right? Like they're working on work that doesn't satisfy their personal values and goes against their ethics. And so they're leaving our industry. So not only are we wasting money as organizations, losing employees, but we're also losing a lot of organizational knowledge, mentorship, and those are all things that we can eventually quantify.
Yeah, I'm curious, just show of hands, who's experienced what I was talking about on your teams and your organizations? Yeah, really interesting. I'm going to turn to Jonathan for a moment, and then we'll hopefully have some talk among the panel, but when we talk about impactful research, we often think about the business side of that, right? But our work impacts the people that we engage with. How does that kind of show up in your work at Headspace? I know it's kind of a unique situation.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Headspace is a mindfulness and meditation platform, but has also grown. We now are beginning to offer therapy and coaching as well. So in my time there, we've been researching mental health and well-being before and then during COVID, and kind of watching that shift and transition. And and credit to Humanity Centered for kind of showing up in that moment of need for me personally, and then our team as well, to think through this. And we've really been thinking about the act of research actually as an act of care. We're engaging in these obviously intimate connected, vulnerable experiences with participants, how are we also caring for them in that moment? So going beyond just rapport building, but what are we doing to actually ensure we aren't activating them unintentionally? How are we actually using trauma-informed practices to permission when we want to, if they're comfortable going more, rather than letting just a business objective of, oh, we need to learn more and answer that and move forward, kind of push us down that lane. And I've been in that position of doing that at times. So thinking more about the potential harm we might cause participants as another consideration to layer in around that. I think often we want to go for that emotion in research because it helps with the storytelling. It helps us kind of like connect with the stakeholders we've all talked about this morning we're trying to influence, but how can we make sure that we're not capturing that at the expense of someone else's well-being?
At what cost? Yeah. And tell us about some specific ways that things you put in place to do that, to provide those moments.
Yeah. So in a lot of our research at Headspace, we think about not just safety, transparency and rigor in that, but also things like pause, rest, joy in the research process. We really want to layer in these opportunities for our participants if they need to take those moments to step back, and also for the researchers to set clear boundaries. We have a bunch of care providers and therapists on staff with us, and they really helped us also think about okay, I'm entering this conversation not as a trained clinician, but as a researcher who does care about you and your well-being. So to get tactical, some of the things we do, we set those boundaries right up front with our participants. In moderated studies, I really love using this technique of that I borrowed from one of my colleagues, Jaren. What we started an interview with what brings you joy, if we know it's going to go somewhere heavy, and we try to return to that moment at the end to kind of give someone the opportunity to end on a high note there around that. And then in unmoderated studies, we'll often introduce these, moments of meditation, moments of pause, or even just multimodal opportunities to share feedback. So, if we're asking about stress and anxiety, we say, do you want to submit a photo? Do you want to submit a video? Do you want to just talk to us about it? Or do you even want to submit a drawing? We do a lot of drawing in our research in mental health and well-being because we found it allows participants to communicate often safely and in a different way, and allows us to gather artifacts and understanding through those means.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned too that sometimes you create like moments of escape, like an escape valve for participants of like, if you don't have to complete this study if it's too much for you or if you're feeling a certain way.
Totally, yeah. We've had participants enter in and like life happens, right? And so I think giving that option to feel like you can go and that's okay, and the study is not the most important thing in
Wait,
their
what?
life. Yeah.
That confuses me. All right, I'm going to allow a little crosstalk. I'm curious if there's any reaction to kind of what Alba and Jonathan were saying from.
I mean, we were looking at each other and nodding about that notion of happy place and then coming back to that happy place if you're talking about something deep. I think that's brilliant, and I really loved hearing that. But I can't say that, I'd have to ask my team, but I can't say that I've heard of us practicing that. So I'm going to suggest that. Thanks for that.
I've not done that either. I think that's something I'm going to take back to my team. Obviously, we're talking about financial health a lot of the time, something that we know is very personal to folks, creates a lot of emotion, and especially when we are doing that with people who are struggling day to day. And this is such a high touch, high emotion topic. Thank you for that. I'm going to incorporate that tomorrow.
That's awesome. Just to I know we're a little bit over time, but we'll indulge in a couple more questions here. Often we're asked to move really quickly and we're asked to tie to the bottom line and make money, but that kind of comes at the expense of some of the the ethical approaches and inclusive approaches, which also take a little bit more time. So, and excludes people at the margins or people who have been historically disadvantaged. What is our responsibility in this as UXRs, as UXR leaders, to kind of walk that line between making money and creating systems of care, which I don't know that they are diametrically opposed. I throw that out there as if they are, but tell me how you feel.
This is where I'm learning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this is not my area.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I have a possible perspective to share here that I've been reflecting on, which is I feel like I want to believe they're not diametrically opposed. Like, I actually feel a lot of synergy across this, and like these are, you're talking about layering additional like, tracking steps, right? To prove, to quantify, and we're talking about layering in practices that, we need to do this right. So it's all about layering those in. I think where I do see a real tension that I think is really tricky to resolve here is like, ultimately I see making money as it feels the nature of like a zero-sum competitive act in the end, right? Because there is a market to be captured and there is one that will get it over. I think for us to be successful in this work, there has to be more, and you were saying this to me this morning, so I'd love to hear your perspective, there has to be more of a spirit of like collective action and like cooperation across us as like research leaders and representatives of these voices in our companies. And I'm not sure those two can quite coexist. I don't know.
So I actually want to share a story of a colleague of mine. So she does enterprise research, and she did a really interesting project where she was talking with like frontline workers, but she used focus groups rather than interviews, which I thought was kind of like an interesting thing, because we usually are always critiquing focus groups because they're very biased and this. But she told me that the reason why she chose that method is because she got all of these people who are normally never in the same room to be in the same room, and therefore they were able to hear each other's pain points, their stories. They found ways that they were more similar than different, and then that actually activated collective action in that organization. They started a union within there. Now, we can't all do that in our organizations, but I thought that that was like a real spark of imagination, in a way of sometimes we don't have to be an advocate for the user. Sometimes we just have to create the conditions in which users can advocate for themselves. And so I think that there is a halfway point where, yeah, maybe we aren't able to tie it to the business, but we can inspire people who do have impact over the business, which was the frontline workers in this case.
I think that's so powerful. And Tad, you were saying you don't have much to contribute, but actually something that you said earlier about the people in the C-suite at the executive level, they care about more than money. They care about people. They care about people problems. So I think,
I'm sorry, but I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
Because secondarily, I think they care about those things. But if they aren't providing value to shareholders, they're not going to be around very long. And so it's money in the end in most cases. And I wish that wasn't true. I'd love to hear a...
Yeah, so I would argue that the best leaders realize that focusing on shareholders, customers, stakeholders, users, partners, that
and the
CFO
health of their
is
people.
how they get the numbers.
Yeah, I think the central thesis, right, and I would hope that many people in this room agree, the idea is if we create better experiences for our customers, if we, in my instance, if we're working with individuals who are struggling day to day with their finances and we help them live a more financially healthy lifestyle, that is helpful in the long term to the bottom line of the business. And so these, the caring about people, the caring about the experience is for the benefit of
the generosity in the pursuit of making money.
But I don't think that's, to me, and maybe this is because I'm an MBA and a recovering attorney, that I don't think it's bad to have both of those sentiments in the mind of for yourself, for your team,
That's a good point.
and for executives. It is, for me, fine to say, look, my goal is to make these experiences better for customers, to make their lives better. And in doing so, yes, Chase will make more money, the executives will make more money, I will make money, I continue to have a home and be employed, and hopefully these people's lives will improve as a result. Because ultimately, if we are creating subpar experiences, if our company ceases to exist, in theory, maybe not for every company, but in theory, that would be bad for people as a whole.
Just one more pile-on is to say that that's the situation the executives are in, right? They have to produce those numbers. They're put in as context. But I think if you get to know those executives, you'd realize they're not that one-sided. There's really a lot more there.
They're humans.
They're humans, yeah.
I love it. Well, that's a good segue. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here, a lot to think and talk about. We're going to just like we did last time, just let the panelists kind of share some of their observations and highlights from the talks that we had. So, Lisa, you want to kick us off?
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the things at table 6 that I thought was really interesting was this notion as we started talking about ROI. Amrita, if you're in here, she brought up the idea of ROO. Maybe you could comment on that.
Oh my gosh, I thought you were just going to tip right off the stage for a second. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Amrita, and I work for a consulting firm. And so in that context, I was talking about how when clients come to us, sometimes they are always not sure of the kind of work they want to do, need to do, and there's always some conflicts from one stakeholder to the other. So recently on a project with a mission-driven company, we were clearly hearing two distinct things. One was definitely about growing revenue, and the other was something more like a response to their mission objective. You know, like, hey, we really need to be doing this thing. And so we just broke it apart into return on investment work and return on objective or return on mission work. And we outlined it differently, and we gave it different time scales and more depth and thought. And it really helped the way we were able to converse about that. It immediately put it in a different bucket, so it was not competing with the ROI work. And that way, even as it goes up the chains to the CEO and the board, it will remain a distinct way of talking about it. So that's what I shared.
I love that. Thank you so much. And then if you don't mind, Julie, I had another from Stephanie who was commenting on the notion of leveraging other departments and getting their feedback.
Hello. Yeah, we were talking actually about doing surveys to other departments to see how we're performing. It was actually a bit, my contribution was a build on that idea. And the idea was, well, what if that's used from human resource point of view of like leverage to let people go? And so we were talking about doing department surveys. So you would do a survey with marketing and say, how well are we doing to get that feedback and help align measuring what's important to them.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I want to touch on what Amrita said for a moment and then come back to that. I've never heard of this idea of return on mission. I think it's a really interesting idea. I'm wondering if anybody else has kind of talked about something like that or heard about something like that. Anybody on the panel? Like, Alba, is that something that you've heard about?
There was a Table 5 conversation about should we tie back to our values, which is sort of getting...
It's not just tying back to it, though. It's like really demonstrating, like, here's how we measurably contributed to that, which I think is really, really interesting. Yeah, very, very cool.
We've tried to think about it a little bit at Headspace of like, you know, kind of different levels of impact or influence and like, what are the things we might, this isn't just my team, this is more a strategic planning process, but like, what are the ways we might measure, you know, not just shareholder value, but also like employee value, value for our members, value in the world, so kind of tying it. And actually, Beth from Table 7 kind of had a build on that framework. If you might want to share a bit more about this sort of mission innovation, metrics for innovation that you were speaking about that kind of ties together some of these pieces.
Yeah, I have to give some credit to Todd for being part of how I learned to do metrics for innovation. But we were talking about like ethics, and part of it occurs to me that there is a useful way to think of this, and part of how we think about quantifying the value and impact and trying to figure out like what are we doing here with innovation. And the way we do that is saying, what are the behaviors and outcomes we're trying to drive, and how do we tell if that's happening, and back into then say, what are the metrics and indicators that tell us that's happening? And so if we're trying to say, how can we ensure we're behaving ethically, we can do the same thing and say, well, how could we what does it look like when we're behaving ethically? How can we tell if it's happening? And then what would be metrics that we might want to put in place to hold ourselves accountable?
That's great.
I love Beth because she actually does the stuff that I talk about doing.
Go ahead, Todd. Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation at the break with Euron. Is that how I say it? Yes. We were talking about, he was talking about a capability that a lot of different disciplines don't learn that would be really helpful and actually turns out to be super important in the being successful. And if you remember what I'm talking about, I won't talk more. I'll just let you talk about it.
So that discipline is change management. Basically, a lot of us people in, I guess, design and UX research come from, from a background where we know how to do research quite well, but we probably don't know how to do change management. And unfortunately, that's the reality that we're facing. We need to learn it how to do it on the job. But I think, if we could incorporate some of this learning right from the start, we would be much better equipped to do a much better job than what we're doing right now.
And do you do that at RBC? Is that kind of a thing that you're...
No. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So basically, the answer is no. It's just an aha moment that I had probably like in the past few weeks or a few months. But I actually did encounter I guess a couple of people in other organizations that I guess are ahead of the curve and are learning how to do this to be able to get to the next level. So yeah, just a thought, pretty much.
Yeah, that's great.
When people ask me what are the toughest things in the space of innovation as a discipline, this broader thing that I focus on a lot, the two things I will say are innovation strategy, because I don't think hardly anybody does innovation strategy in a way that, in my opinion, is mature. But the other one is change management. It's simply how do we get change to happen in organizations, because innovation always involves risk. There's resistance. How do you help organizations overcome that risk? So I think it's true across so many disciplines. If you're trying to make change happen, let's make sure that we're really thoughtful about great methods to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and it came up earlier today too, this idea of change and change management, and like, we're doing that within organizations, we're doing that on our teams, and we're doing that as an industry too. Like, that's what we're kind of came here to talk about, is like, what do we need to change? Kind of reflecting that back on ourselves too, that what do we, if the next level of UXR leadership in our industry is like helping manage change and helping making decisions, like what skills do we need as leaders to help organizations move through those moments in a more effective and efficient way? I think there's something really important about that. Are we equipped to manage the change that not only we're asking people to do within our products or our strategies, but like that we're asking our teams to undergo as well?
One of the things that I challenged our group on was when you think about the evolution of any industry, you're going to get things that are leading edge, bleeding edge, that a few years later become commoditized. I remember when we first introduced Target to the idea of ethnography, like that's a possibility that you could talk to that few people and not hundreds or thousands. And it was absolutely inane. It was asinine that we would think of that, they said, at the time in 2002, 20 years ago. And now look at it, right? Now those things are table stakes. Those things are expected and to some degree commoditized. So how do we think about what's next? A lot of the things I was hearing today sort of assumed what we do, as if we all know what we do, and what we do is what we do, and what we do is what we're going to do. And maybe what we should say is, what should we do? How could we use our capabilities? How could we use our special skills in different ways in organizations? And that's kind of where I was going with zooming up and down the organization, looking at different teams. Those teams need the skill sets in this room, but in some cases it might be applying them in ways that you're not applying them today.
That's a good provocation. Does it spark any thoughts among the group?
Maybe calling them different things too.
Like
I wonder if research, like I was reflecting on it this morning, like, you know, research influences, it gathers, right? It persuades. It doesn't always create or make, you know, or solve. It suggests sometimes. And I wonder if, like, yeah, that sort of thinking back to the conversation around roles and relations, like we can break out of that, but what do we need to let go of to do that potentially?
Yeah, and the words and the language that we use are really important. That's another orthodoxy of mine, was like, and people who have been on my teams know that, like I've always been like, let's just call it something obvious, UXR, UER, something like that. And is that really what we should be doing now? Is that the right, are we even calling ourselves the right thing? I'm not the first one to pose this question. Like there are many articles about this right now and lots of soul searching around it, but is JM in the room? JM? Oh, he just walked out. JM works at AT&T as a design strategist, and he was kind of saying, well, I do research a lot, actually use DScout a lot, but like, I don't think of myself as a researcher. Like research is something I do a lot of it, but I'm a strategist. Like that's how people see me, and that's what I'm doing in the organization. So people don't see me as a researcher. And he was like, that feels like a very kind of cocky thing to say, like, and I was like, no, but it's true, and that's something we should all be thinking about, yeah?
Kristen had some comments on language. And
Oh,
how we use
yes.
it.
Yeah, I think that when we were talking about reporting back on metrics and the idea that we as researchers or as part of UX function might have the idea that it's an intangible that we're going after, right? A bigger idea. But it's also good for the business, and the business has a different idea about what that outcome looks like. So we're going to be doing it in ways that work towards that intangible and are helping, you know, solve a problem and that kind of thing. But we might talk to the business about it in a very numbers-based, you know, kind of, you know, quantitative measures. And it's just that idea of storytelling, like, you know, catering the message to kind of the recipient so that they understand it.
Right, and you tied it to last night as well. The same idea, you don't tell consumers that we're saving the world, you tie it to the nostalgia they have with beans, or whatever the case might be. It's
back to beans.
Yeah, all comes back to beans.
It's all about the bean. Yeah. Greg, did you have some insights to share? I think you have a little bit of something, maybe a different.
Yeah, a bit of a different topic. I think a couple of great conversations with tables 3 and 4. I will make no comments about which tables are the best, but they know where I stand. We had a great conversation about a couple of topics from earlier today as well, around the democratization of research and its intersection with safety and risk and compliance and trauma. Right? How do we do research that may create risk or create trauma in our participants? And how do we do that while trying to democratize the work that we're doing? Danielle from that table, are you around somewhere to speak more? Yes, Danielle, if you could tell us a little bit more of your thoughts.
Hi. So my thought was basically, even in the research world, we're not fully consistent on making sure that we all know how to talk to users without causing harm, and knowing that we're approaching the conversations we're having with people just in a very ethical way. And so we still have a lot to figure out amongst ourselves, let alone to someone who comes to us with absolutely no research background. And if like anyone can learn it, that's not the problem. Like if they're interested in learning, by all means, yes. But there's a huge risk in not, and I don't just mean like reputation risk, I mean like legal risk, ethical risk of letting loose a whole bunch of people or even just one person to talk directly to users without training them on how to do that in a way that's not going to cause harm.
Yeah, I'll put my lawyer hat on here, although first I have to caveat by saying this is not legal advice.
Fine print.
Yes, fine print. I mean, there is actual liability involved for us to consider, right? If we have any employee going into, for example, doing ethnography work, going into somebody's home, place of business, following them around, there is liability risk. That employee could physically harm the customer. The customer could physically harm the employee. Someone could slip and fall. And that creates a risk for the company, for that researcher as an individual, right? For that person's family. There are all of these considerations that we need to keep track of as professionals. And it's important for us as we go into people's homes or we do our work. But gosh, if we're to send people who are just doing it for the first time, I mean, think about a lot of folks in this room have worked with undergraduate researchers, for example, right? And the amount of oversight that you have to provide those folks to make sure that they are abiding by best practices, they're being supervised. That doesn't go away just because somebody works at a company now. And in fact, it might get even more stringent. And so that, I think it's a really interesting point, and one now that I have to bring back to my legal partners. Thank you.
Yeah, it's back to your point earlier about risk mitigation. I mean, I think we need to change the conversation around democratization, right? Everybody thinks like, oh, researchers don't want people to do research because they're precious about their research and that's just the way they are and they're just kind of a pain that way. But that's not the conversation we should be having with our stakeholders. It's about like, there are real things that we need to consider as we do this so that we can embrace a culture of user-centeredness and give people access to people and access to insights and go on that learning journey together, but like safely for everybody. Alba, I know you have thoughts on this.
Oh my God, so many. So let me give you an example. So this past year, 12 months on one research project, we were working with youth in the foster care system, right? So you can imagine this is one of the most vulnerable populations that you could possibly work with. They're underage. They have been removed by the US government from their homes, and now they are placed in either institutions, foster care homes, or with relatives and friends, right? So highly traumatized by a very racist system. Okay, so like that's the context that we're starting with, right? So in this particular project, we were trying to democratize, but we were actually trying to democratize in a way that I think is usually very valued, in that we tried to bring on researchers who actually had experience in the foster care system, right? So this is the ideal, right? Like we want to have our research teams reflect the populations that we're doing research with. The first interview that we did, not with a youth, but with a mental health professional who was talking about their interactions with youth, they said something that was very offensive about youth and their families who are in the system. And this researcher started to get activated, and you could see it physically, right? Like they're starting to get really red, they're getting very tense, they're not able to focus because they were so angry at what that participant said that they just completely lost sense of where they were. And then they said something that was really offensive to the participant, basically. And the participant was like, well, because I'm actually you're in to get access to other participants, well, now I'm not going to connect you to those other participants. So we actually had to pause the project for several weeks because we no longer had access to that sample. Right, so here's an example of, we have very good intentions of making our research team more inclusive in order to produce better research. So we're democratizing it and increasing inclusivity, and yet the people did not have the training on how to do work on their own experience. Because I think we often think about, you know, that it's only about people who are doing research on very specific topics that need to be trained on these things, but even doing research on people who have your own experience can be traumatizing in itself. And our teams, the systems that we have in place, the protocols do not reflect diversity and inclusion in that way. So what I always say is that we can't divorce equity from trauma-informed practices, and yet we don't ever talk about that in research.
I think you raise a good point too, that with democratization of work, all of these situations might arise. Democratization in theory is meant to give us time back to do other work, but gosh, I've not experienced a lot of democratization projects that are easier for me than running the damn project myself. Right? I mean, depending on the complexity of the project, you're talking about setting up the project with that, whoever it is, designer, project manager, or whoever, training them on how to go out into the field and do that work, sending someone out there with them, potentially, teaching them how to analyze and synthesize the data. I mean, there's more work involved oftentimes in helping somebody else learn how to do this, which is not to say we shouldn't do it, right? It's great to teach other people how to do this work, but it's really not a time-saving method, and we shouldn't think of democratization of research as a way that we are all going to get a bunch of time back to do even cooler work.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story. I think Elizabeth, it was at table 10, was talking about being forced to do an internal focus group on the same topics that user research was done and the results of that. Is that right, Elizabeth? Did you tell that story?
So, can you hear me? Oh, good. Yeah, I was working with a company that does peripherals for consumers for tech devices, right? So think of your, your headphones and things like that, anything you connect to your laptop. And they were very new to user research and ethnographic research, and they weren't ready to go. They're like, let's just start with some focus groups. And so they had their target audience for these focus groups to check out these speakers, and they insisted on this really odd thing. They said, well, we also want to do an internal focus group with our internal folks too. And we were kind of like, that's crazy. Why would we do a research, a focus group with our internal folks? Like, okay, do it. It was awesome. It was a great, I would recommend everyone do this, because of course the consumers picked what they wanted, and it was the complete opposite of what the people internally chose. And it was just this clear cut of like, this is why you should do consumer research, because if you only talk to your internal folks, you would build the wrong product. So it was a great experience.
I'd have been telling that story for years in the future.
I wonder, Ellie from table 6, if you could comment on your internal advisory boards. That's a related topic, I think. Is Ellie here?
So similar to what you shared, there was a topic that I work at Lululemon, and we were exploring a new category, and we didn't really have the funding to do outside research. So we decided to leverage our internal employees as an advisory board to help with that research. And obviously they're internal, so those same things could happen. However, lots of the insights that the group provided were actually not only applicable to their needs, but also our target consumer. And I think it just showed our leaders too the importance of speaking to that group, and then we were really able to apply some inclusive design based on those specific needs to the rest of the target. So super successful, and really great employee experience for that group, because they were able to develop acumen and understand of research, and also advocate for the things that we were talking about.
I'm a big proponent of internal research like this, specifically as a pilot for the external research. We do it quite a bit because a lot of our projects are time intensive to set up. They're very expensive. It's difficult to find the right customer sometimes. And so we'll do internal, we will recreate the research as a pilot internally to figure out what do we need to adjust and change as we go external. And then it allows us to compare what our employees say with what our customers,
Well,
which are
I've
not
got to
always
know.
the same thing.
Yeah, because my fear, I guess fear as a company who makes money off doing research externally would be that your stakeholders would say, hey, it's so predictive just to talk to ourselves. We don't ever need to talk to anyone but our own people.
Yeah, I think, well, first I'll acknowledge my own privilege in my organization, and that my organization has bought into the idea that we should do external research at this point, right? As I said, we have 140 UX researchers. This is not a company that says, hey, just talk to a couple employees and that's good enough. We really use this, though, to make sure that our research is fit for purpose and that it's really valuable. And it is also an opportunity for our stakeholders to be involved and to observe, to see the work that we're doing, to make any adjustments after the fact. I'm sure we're all very familiar with doing research sessions and having stakeholders show up and say, I don't know, I didn't really like that line of questioning, or I didn't really like what we heard about this, or I wish we explored this topic. Well, doing an internal pilot really gives us that opportunity to adjust on the fly, again, especially for the stuff that is time intensive or expensive or logistically very difficult.
Interesting. I'm going to hand it over. I'm sorry. Alba, why don't you go, and then we'll hand it to Jonathan for a couple of his takeaways as well.
Well, I just wanted to add that this is also kind of like an ethical good as well, because when we're doing internal work, we can focus on, kind of like our core projects. And then when we're actually doing external research, we can actually focus on groups that are historically marginalized or who are usually excluded. And we don't have to focus so much on questions that are often asked of them, so we can avoid over-researching them, re-traumatizing them, and all of these things. So there's an interesting thing here where I think we often think that the most ethical thing is to always talk to users, but I actually think we should be relying a lot more on secondary research. We should be relying a lot more on pilot research so that we can actually target our external research to the questions that matter, that investigate the nuances that matter.
Yeah, something we used to do too is partner with ERGs within the organization to kind of test our research with different audiences and different communities and see kind of how it resonated with them and what we were starting to learn. Jonathan.
Yeah, I love this perspective, by the way, because we don't do enough of that internal sort of piloting, and so it's really interesting. I do think it raises for me, though, this idea of like, how can we be more explicit about potential biases in that upfront as well? So we'd love to chat after about that. I guess I think the tables that I was at, I think last thought I'll kind of raise is like, I do think, at least at table 8, there was a feeling of kind of a need for changing our sort of foundational belief system around this. And I want to put Katie on the spot a bit around this notion, and I know citation pending on this quote, but that we should move away from the attention economy to the intention economy. I would love to hear kind of your thoughts around your experiences there and what that meant to you. Katie, oh yeah.
Is Katie here?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, this Katie.
I was looking for you on that.
You moved. I moved. Well, Julie made me feel bad for not sitting in the middle, so I'm here now. I'm right in the middle.
Mission accomplished.
Yes, you did it. Yes, I think for me, a lot of the things that you all have said and others have said about change management, absolutely believe that we can do all the research we want, but if we can't change people's minds, it won't necessarily matter. So the example I was talking about was working at Google, and in the dawn of the LLM age with GPT having been launched and being asked, well, users really don't not want ads, right? I mean, like, that's not really, maybe they just don't know that they don't want ads. And we had research that was definitively saying that people love GPT because it gave them an answer without distraction, right? And what I was saying to the table is that for me, and not to beautifully segue into the orthodoxies workshop Julie and I are about to run
in 5 minutes.
Yes, but that is truly a reflection of an unwillingness to flip an orthodoxy, right? We believe that we can only make money by harvesting data and selling ads, and unless we are willing to challenge that orthodoxy and potentially flip it and imagine a world where we are an intention economy, not an attention economy, and that's Chris Downs from Normally is responsible for that. It's not me. So please don't attribute his brilliance to me at all. It's him. But it's true, right? And that's truly what it comes down to, is being able to get people to question their belief systems that have served them very well for a very long period of time, potentially individually, financially served them well, and now need to be overturned. So
yeah. Oh God, that is such a good segue.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh my gosh, it's
Thanks,
perfect.
Jonathan, really
we
helps.
actually just have, we just have a few minutes before we transition to our orthodoxies workshop and wrap up our day. Anybody on the panel have anything that they are holding on to that was part of the conversation that you wanted to share? Great.
I have one more. Right, we started this panel talking about impact and business measures and impact. And I just wanted to reiterate, I'll turn it over to Dr. Nikki Smith in a minute, but the importance of understanding the business perspective, right? And do you want to, can you add, she spoke so eloquently on this, I don't want to steal her thunder.
You are gracious to me. Thank you. Okay, so we talked about, yes, translating the researcher. So I've said this at another table, I think, earlier today. My research team, PhDers, very smart people, very rigorous in their practice. They care a lot about the way in which they conduct research, their methodology, how they articulate the findings, but not all the time do they have the business acumen and the some of the competencies needed to translate what's insightful to us as people who care about the actual work to what is meaningful to someone who has to do something with it and the implications of what that work means to the business. And so it's my job as the leader to be that translator, to then say, here's the insightful thing, and you need the context, you need the meat, but you have to say it in a way, you have to finesse it in a way that meets the need of, here's what we're solving for. We're alleviating the pain points in these experiences. We're alleviating the friction that consumers might feel when they go rent a car, or employees might feel, or all the things, and we're showing them what that means from an experience metric standpoint. And so we're also tying numbers into our research as well, and that comes with Qualtrics and a bunch of other systems that we kind of have been able to utilize. But really, it's a matter of understanding the implications. What problem are you solving, and being able to articulate that and saying, I'm giving you this evidence-based recommendation is what we're calling it. So then you know this is an opportunity. It solves for the pain. Here's the recommendation. Now go do. And we're tracking that through things like AHA, Jira, all the stuff, because we have such close relationships with product and design. And I think that's something that's a benefit to us that maybe other people have not had the privilege to experience. But yeah,
That's awesome.
And the phrase that I use with my team a lot is, we don't write book reports on my team, right? So you don't just listen to the customer, write down the customer quote, and regurgitate the customer quote. I think there was somebody earlier in the audience, sorry I didn't write your name down during the panel discussion, who was asking about, with strategic work, I feel like I'm starting to provide more and more of my own opinion, and I'm worried about that. And I almost jumped out of my chair to say, no, like, do more of that. I really, I push all of my folks as much as they can to provide their own opinion, and you should make it clear when it is your opinion. But I feel very strongly that if we as researchers or strategists, right, or strategic thought partners in the business are not providing our strategic thoughts and opinions, then what the hell value do we have? I really feel very strongly about
Well,
that.
and I know we need to wrap up, but I'm curious, Alba, because you noted the importance of, when we're talking to an audience, having someone that can relate to that audience be the one speaking to them. But I worry about when we get to the report out and decision-making space, that the voice of those people aren't in the room at that point. Maybe either of you have a thought on that, of the audience that's being talked about. So someone that was a foster child, or someone that really can relate to whatever.
Oh, we don't have time for that question. That's the one that's not that. But I do actually want to, I love this distinction between making research insightful versus making research meaningful. Because I think one of the things that we try to do a lot at Humanity Centered is when we're talking with executives, we're trying to recognize that they are people too.
Yep.
Right. And so when we are reporting back a research project, or we're reporting back the findings of something, or we're trying to share feedback that their employees have shared with us, it's really about trying to figure out what is the type of leadership that they're trying to occupy, who are they trying to become, and how can our work help support that internal mission, not just the organization's business goals, but really about how can I support my leadership, therefore show my value and impact by making them feel more secure in their own leadership. So I think we can be both strategic in terms of understanding the business, but also more strategic in understanding the leaders that we're reporting this to.
Go read your quarterly financial reports. Not a joke. Like, tomorrow, if you have not already, and your company has quarterly financial reports, spend 30 minutes and read them. There's nothing that will be more useful to you that I've said at all, so ignore everything else I've said previously. Go read your quarterly financial reports and understand why those things are important to your business. That is the most important thing you can do to build that connection with your business and understand how your work can make impact for the organization.
Thank you. Well, with that, we'll wrap up the share out. And I just want to, again, thank the panel for traveling from far and wide to be here and share your wisdom and spark conversations. We really appreciate you so much. Thank you. And I talked earlier about the collective curiosity and creativity of this group. And as it always is the case when I
All right, with that, I know a lot of people have already dropped off. Thank you so much, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye.
Right now, I am at my resort.
Right now, I'm in the grocery store.
I am walking around Home Depot.
Now I'm going for a little walk.
We're getting ready to do some practicing.